Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable Podcast 6-month reunion special. Today's Sunday, the 17th of April 2016, and I'm your host, John LeBon, joined as always by my good friend Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Ethan, thanks for making the time today.
It's great to be here again, Jono.
Yeah, it's been a little while and we're a little bit rusty, but I'm sure the audience will forgive us for that. And we are, of course, joined as usual by the Silver Fox himself, Lindsay. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you. And it's really great to be back after all this time.
It is. And once upon a time, we used to waste the first 10 minutes of the show running through what the show was meant to be about. I'm not going to run through the terms and conditions of this one. This is just a nice, friendly catch-up. But we do have a little bit of structure that we're going to keep to a few topics that we're hoping to talk about. So just quickly, today we'll be talking about Port Arthur, some updates to do with that since the last time we were all on air. The Magistrates Court and the legal system in general, which is obviously one of Lindsay's favourite things to talk about. The Panama Papers is apparently big in the news. I wouldn't know, but Ethan and Lindsay do. They want to talk about that. And then I've got a couple of articles from closer to home here in Australia that I want to talk about to do with the cultural Marxism that has taken over this country. And in the 6 months since we last went to air, it's only gotten worse. So quite a few things we want to talk about, boys. But before we get into any of that, it has been 6 months since the season finale of the ARP Season 1. And we've all gone off and done our own little things in the meantime. So let's reacquaint the listeners with what it is that we actually do with our time. And I'll start with you there, Ethan. How's the last 6 months treated you?
Oh, Jono, it's gone pretty quick. I can't believe that it's been 6 months already, over a year and a half since we met each other and started doing this show. It's just flown by. And yeah, I've just been doing the same thing I've always been doing, writing for tottnews.com, my website here in Australia, writing for other publications that I've been doing. I went out and got myself a real job in the real world, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday job, and it's been good. I still see the same rhetoric that we've been talking about continued and regurgitated every single week in the news. It's never ending, and it's got to the point where I've gone so far on my spiritual journey, or my awakening journey, if you want to call it that, that I've really just shut myself off from the news. I still understand what's happening, but I've never really had that emotional attachment to it anymore. So over the last 6 months, I've just been living my life, trying to better myself as a person, better myself in my professional fields, and obviously not pay attention to what's going on in the world around me on that emotional level, but certainly still keeping an eye on everything that's been happening that we've been speaking about for the last 2 years, Jono.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we started the show as a news analysis and discussion show. We gave, I guess, an alternative take to the mainstream news, but certainly from my perspective, Ethan, tell me how you feel about this. By the time we got to the end of that first season of the ARP, I was only paying attention to the news just so I could then talk about it on our show. I have no interest in following it other than that. And from what you're saying, it sounds like you might have followed a bit of a similar arc.
Yeah, definitely. Being with each other, I saw you a lot more than a lot of other people in my life during that time, Jono, and, I think we both went on that sort of spiritual journey. I think we both went separate paths, but we've ended up at the same sort of conclusion, the same, perspective of what's going on around us. And yeah, we did start the show with the intention, we'll speak about it later, but we started the show with the intention of presenting news from an alternative perspective, and I've reached a point now where, not only do I question the alternative perspective, I also question the information on all sides. I question all the information that's being fed to me, and by the end of the show, I think the ARP took on a life of its own that was beneath the information. I've said this a couple of times, it was more, from our perspective, us on a spiritual journey, and every week we were learning something, and the ARP served as a platform for us to discuss the news and continue that journey. So yeah, definitely I've reached a similar conclusion, but I still pay attention every now and then just to see what's happening.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, we'll talk about all of that and more in a moment, but first we'll go to Lindsay. Lindsay, it's been a big 6 months for all of us, and you as well. Do you want to give us a brief rundown of how you've been the last little while?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to put the hard word on Ethan if he's got a 9 to 5 job. How good are you for a loan, Ethan, if I need? No, that's all right. I'm trying to be smart, but it's obviously not. No, I'm pretty good. Actually, the last time I was on here, I was looking after my mother, and it was causing me a bit of problems. Mum since has had falls and deteriorated, and she's had a bit of a stroke, and she's now in a nursing home. And it's sort of it's freed me up a little bit in that I've got more than time to go shopping or whatever. But all the relatives are all coming to see her, so I've got like a constant stream of people coming through the house all the time. So it's better, but it's not 100%. But my life has changed a little bit. It's freed up a fair bit. So I'm feeling quite relaxed, and I'm actually getting anywhere up to 7 or 8 hours sleep a night now, which is like unheard of for me. So I feel a lot better. Thanks.
No, that's all right, mate. Obviously, the idea was it has been 6 months, and even though I guess for the three of us, we've been in constant communication, so we have a general idea of how each other's going. A lot of listeners wouldn't have heard from either of you really in that 6 months, or even from myself, depending on who they're subscribed to. So just give them a basic idea of how we've been and get that out of the way. But now that we've done that, there are a few topics we want to get through, and I guess we used to pride ourselves on having a fairly structured show. Obviously, a lot of people in the independent media, they're not very professional, they're not very well thought out in the way they present themselves sometimes, which can be a blessing and can be a curse, but we used to pride ourselves on trying to keep a bit of structure for a show. And old habits die hard, don't they? So today we are doing something similar, and what we'll do is we'll jump straight into the topics, probably chat about them for 30, 40, 50 minutes, see how we go, and then after that we'll just have a bit of an open discussion to round out the show. So let's get into the topics then, and the first one that I know means a lot to the both of you, especially you, Lindsay, is to do with Port Arthur. So do you want to give the listeners who might not already be aware, firstly a background on what Port Arthur was, and then maybe some information about the little trip that we made up north last year to go and see someone who was directly related to the incident, and then get into some of the more specific details that have come up lately.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Okay, for a lot of people, I don't know what will happen today, but we have in the past we've had people from other countries listen to us, and they may not know the ins and outs of it. But coming up on the 28th of April this year is the 20th anniversary of the massacre at Port Arthur. 35 people killed, and umpteen people injured, wounded. But it wasn't just that. It virtually destroyed that whole community. The lives of all those people in that community suffered as a result of it. All the family. It had far-reaching effects. And I'm a firm believer that it was like a psych op of whatever, however you like to describe it, because within 10 days the Prime Minister was already touting gun laws that had been prepared beforehand, and just so coincidentally, we've had this massacre and now we can bring these gun laws out. That it really did stink. Well, for me anyway at the time. So, but I was involved with the Inverell Forum, which was like a group, pretty much the same topics that we discuss on this show. People came from all over Australia to the Inverell Forum, and there'd be 200 or 300 people there each year. And we had a lady called Wendy Skur, who was one of the tour operators in the Port Arthur historic site, and she was also the lady in charge of first aid. And she was one of the first people into the cafe where all the people were murdered. So it affected her quite badly, and she was having nightmares, and she's even talked about, contemplating suicide afterwards and things like that. It really did have a very deleterious effect upon her and many of the people she knew. She came to the Inverell Forum and gave us a talk, and it opened it up for her, because I remember her talking at the time and saying it was almost like a cathartic thing, that she'd been having so much difficulty getting what she saw out to people. And when she's spoken to the people at the forum and they received what she said with respect, and it made a huge difference to her life. And as a result of that, then people, virtually the whole length of Eastern Australia, started having meetings in different towns. All the people from the forum who'd gone back to their own town decided to have a meeting and invite her, and she gave talks up and down. But it wasn't as simple as that, because she was being harassed. You'd think that after having been through that, where you're walking around, she went home at the end of that day with brains in her hair and all this, it was a horrific thing she put up with, standing on people's skulls and things like that. it's unimaginable if you haven't been through it. And the authorities in Tasmania harassed her. It was almost like she was on a workers' compensation thing, and they were spying on her to make sure she wasn't working. They were following her around like that because she'd opened her mouth and was saying what happened at Port Arthur. Now, one of the main things that she was on about was that the police didn't arrive for 6 or 6.5 hours or something after they received the first call, and it really upset her and all the other people who were there. It'd be different. It was only 1 hour from Hobart. It'd be different if it took them 2 hours. You'd say, oh yeah, they took an hour to get organised or whatever. No, 6 hours before they could come in, and there were still guns going off. So it really was appalling stuff. And yet then they followed her around and anybody else who spoke up, and they harassed them. And I think that...
I'll just interject there, Lindsay, just so we can get a bit of context to all of this. So what you're talking about is a lady who was involved in that incident of Port Arthur. You're saying that you've spoken to her, and now you're recounting her tales of being harassed and what have you for speaking out.
Yeah.
And you've recently gone and spoken with her subsequent to the ARP wrapping up season 1.
Yeah, I have done. Well, first of all, we all three of us went up there. Well, you recall, and we had an interview with her, or over a day and a half, or whatever, and we recorded all that so that we've got it for posterity. Now, I've recently been up there. There was another young fella who was going to make a movie. I think he still is going to make the movie, and he was doing an interview with her, and I just wanted to be there to listen if there was anything else that came out of it that we hadn't heard before. So I went up there and I spent a few days. I've been up there twice. I intend to go back again, maybe over the next week or so, and I will try and get all the witness statements that she's got. I'll try and photocopy all the copies of witness statements she's got that were given to the police, so that we'll have that, so that we can investigate it further. And I've also been spending a bit of time doing some videos that I want to put up on YouTube eventually, but I want to make sure that they're correct. I don't want to be putting up something that's not correct. But that's what we've been doing. It's not just her. The more you go in and read the witness statements, there's just so many things involved in this Port Arthur that really stink. And I think the thing for me that's upset me recently is that all three networks in Australian television, you had 7, 9 and the ABC, and they all came out with a propaganda video over the last month or so, and most of it's all been anti-gun. Now, nowhere in amongst it did they talk about this so-called killer, Martin Bryant, having an IQ of an 11-year-old. Nowhere did they talk about... There's a paper that was brought out afterwards for the Australian Emergency Management Committee. It's an Australia-wide committee, and they had a conference from all the different participants in the Port Arthur massacre. The police, the State Emergency Service, all these people came and they gave their opinions at this. And then after the conference, they put a record of all those speeches and they put it into a booklet, and it was called the EMA report. Now, one of the things that came to light early in the piece, and which I've made a video on just recently, was that the President of Australia's Senate was one of the people who gave a talk at that EMA conference. And he made the statement, and I haven't got the exact words in front of me now, but pretty much he was saying there was an undertaking group called Nelson Brothers, and they brought in special embalming equipment ready for the massacre, or ready for the incident, I think they said, or words to that effect anyway. Now, that straight away you think, was that a slip of the tongue, or like a Freudian slip where he actually knew what was happening and he meant, yeah, we knew there was going to be an incident and we brought in this equipment. And then that ties in with there was a mortuary vehicle for 22 bodies. And it even says in this EMA report that, everybody thought we were mad. Why would you want a 22-body mortuary truck for transporting bodies in Tasmania, where you never get more than 1 or 2 or something like that, So
let me just summarise all that, Lindsay. So basically, there was this event. It's still Australia's, possibly our biggest event of this type, certainly in contemporary history. The Sydney siege still is nowhere near as big as Port Arthur in terms of the effect that it's had on people's minds and the way that it's been used to justify making guns harder for people to own, things like this. And what you're saying is that you've recently been in more contact with someone who was at the incident at the time, and now you're going over some of the reasons why there are many people out there who question whether what we were told about what happened there is true. I'll go to you there, Ethan. Anything you want to add to all of this before we get into a broader discussion on the topic?
Yeah, well, obviously, we're bringing up the topic of Port Arthur because, as Lindsay mentioned recently, because the 10-year anniversary of this event is coming up, one of the biggest so-called terrorist attacks that we've had in this country. It resulted in the direct confiscation of our semi-automatic weapons here in Australia. It removed our guns. The reason why we don't have guns here in Australia, for those international listeners that are listening, is directly because of this event. And the 10-year anniversary is coming up, and over these 10 years, people like Wendy Skerr, who were at the event, people like other researchers that have written books, that have done videos about it, have exposed some of the inconsistencies and the lies with this story. And now that it's coming up on the 10th anniversary, all of the major networks here in Australia have been airing pieces about it, showing inside the mind of a killer, showing extra information, adding to the story to bring up this narrative again and to induce fear once again into the people that may have forgot about this, and also to push an agenda now that we're trying to loosen up the gun laws here in Australia again. So that's the reason we're obviously bringing up Port Arthur. That happened in Tasmania, the little island at the bottom of Australia, at the Port Arthur historical site. And the reason we're bringing it up is because subsequent to this 10th anniversary, a lot of new researchers are coming out, including myself and Lindsay, with the work that we're going to be doing. So we just wanted to bring it up, talk about some of the inconsistencies to those that aren't aware of what happened at that event, and also talk about some of the work that we're doing going forward. So I'll throw that back to you, John, if you want to add
a couple of
anything
things
to
on that. Obviously, it's it happened in '96, so we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
And it is. You're right. The mainstream media is using this sort of as an excuse to rehash it. And the thing with this kind of conditioning of the masses is that it's almost like triggering them, like Pavlovian dogs. So if somebody's 60 years old now, they would have been 40 at the time. Someone like myself who's 28, I was in primary school at the time, and we spent days sort of talking about how guns are bad following the event. So most of us who were around 20 years ago, when the mainstream media brings us up again, it brings back all of those sort of eerie, nasty thoughts or feelings that people had at the time. And most people can't deal with that in a logical or rational manner. So if you bring up with them some of the many inconsistencies around the story, they're not able to think about it logically or rationally because they've been programmed emotionally. And it sounds like, Ethan, one of the reasons why you and Lindsay wanted to bring this one up today is because you've both been doing a little bit of work to help get the message out there about what happened. Is there any estimated time that you think you might have some work ready to share with the people?
In terms of, we originally did, obviously, when the three of us went and saw her, we did that audio video, and as you're aware, John, it was just a mammoth of information that we got. We got all of the information in all of the folders, just decades of work that people have done, all just condensed and put into these folders that we were given on USBs. And of course, we had the up-to-date interview with Wendy where she talked about a lot of her experiences prior and a lot of new things that she's learnt now about the broader spectrum of the broader agenda that's at hand. And obviously, that was during, the ARP, and we sort of just put it off because we were busy with the ARP. We were busy with our own work especially. And since the show has ended, obviously, we wanted to take a hiatus. We wanted to, obviously try to refresh ourselves and take a different approach to things when we come back. And now that we're coming back, Lindsay and I have been talking about beginning the processes. And I certainly am aiming to have something like this out by the end of the year, not because necessarily I wholeheartedly believe the information. As I mentioned at the start of the show, I've become a more skeptical person in terms of everything that's around me, but just because I want to present the alternative. That's one of the reasons I started my website, tottnews.com, was to present the alternative. Now, I don't know what's right or wrong, but I encourage people to always think for themselves and come to a conclusion, whatever it may be. And the problem with this is that there is no alternative side to the information. So I want to do it just to bring this information into the 21st century, just to bring it into a more multimedia, modern approach that you can market to anyone that might not be familiar with the event. And with Lindsay's help, I'm certainly, we're going to make a go of that. So in terms of answering your question, no direct time frame, but we're beginning the processes, and we want to have it out by the end of the year, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I say, I've done one already, but I haven't put it up yet on YouTube. Just about this President of the Senate, because that, to me, that really was smacked of something not right there. And I've done another one, but it's going to take another week or so before I've got it where I feel it's polished enough to put up. But I think there's so much involved with this topic that I think you could probably put out 20 or 30 videos and still not cover the whole thing. I think Wendy, the last time I was up there a week or two ago, she was saying that some time ago that she'd sat down and they'd gone through, and there was something like 40 coincidences or anomalies with associated with it.
Yeah.
And that takes a huge amount of time to study and then to put it into perspective and then make a video or whatever about it, so that people can analyse it dispassionately. So it is going to take time and effort. And Wendy's she's not a well woman at the moment, so I think she's got it in her mind that she would like to hand it over to younger people. I'm not much younger than her, but you fellas, for instance, so that it continues on, so it doesn't die with her. I think that's what she's got in her mind, and I think that's great. She really is a tough sort of a woman, but you can't go through something like that and not have it affect you, and it has affected her health now. So anyway, we'll see where we are. For me, it's more. I have this great empathy for her, and respect for her, and I'd like to see her message get out. Now, I'll try the best I can, but as I said, I'm not much younger than her, so it will in the end it'll fall back to fellas like you to carry on the baton.
Yeah, so that's definitely what we're trying to do. Obviously, a big intention with it was to obviously carry it on, because a lot of people, don't really have a reference point when searching this information. So, you mentioned some of the main points before, but as you said, it's going to be a mammoth task to obviously sort through all of this. So we just wanted to give the listeners, John, an update on what we're doing, because we've been having emails asking what we're doing with the Port Arthur material, and now certainly with the 20-year anniversary coming up with all of these news programs airing it, it's never been a better time to do it, because a lot of people are starting to wake up and question now. So we just wanted to let the viewers know that we're going to be starting to make a move on that and to look out for that in the future.
Excellent. Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure we put a link to Lindsay's YouTube channel in the info box below this on YouTube, and also a link to it from AusRoundtable.com. So when Lindsay does start making some of these videos public and releasing them to the people, they'll know where to find them. From my own perspective, obviously I was there with you guys when we went up to see Wendy last year, and it was a terrific time just hanging out with you two. It was so much fun. The trip up there, the trip back, those couple of days, for me personally, they were sensational. As far as the Port Arthur event itself is concerned, I'm very skeptical, and it never makes sense to me these days now, whenever I hear people talk about the potential for the government or some other group to kill people as part of a psyop or something like this, because they don't need to. They can just tell us on the TV that something happened and that people died, and almost every single one of us is going to believe them. It's a tiny minority of people who say, well, I know you're saying that people died or got hurt, but where's your evidence? Not many people do that. So why would they have to go and kill 10 or 20 people to then tell us that someone killed 10 or 20 people? They could just tell us and not kill anyone. So I'm still very skeptical about the idea that anyone did die or get hurt, but I'll be looking at all the evidence that you guys can put together, and who knows, maybe you can sway me. But that's Port Arthur. We need to press on because we've got a few topics we need to talk about today. The next one that you wanted to talk about, Ethan, I'll let you kick this one off, is the Panama Papers. And let me preface this one by saying I have not read a single article or watched a single news segment about the Panama Papers. I have no idea what it's about. So, Ethan, why don't you fill me in?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jono. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this topic. Obviously a lot has happened over the last 6 months. I could rattle off so many news articles about everything that we've been talking about. The new vaccine laws have been passed. All of these things have happened that we were talking about on the show. But I wanted to talk about this topic because it is the most relevant in my opinion at the moment. It's what I'm seeing everywhere at the moment. And just to open up a discussion about where we are in terms of certain perceptions past that, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute, but before I get into that, for those who aren't aware of what the Panama leaks are, the official background is that the Panama Papers are a leak set of about 11 million confidential documents, and they provide detailed information for about more than 200,000 offshore companies listed by the corporate service provider Mossack Fonseca out of Panama, which is obviously a location known for being an international tax haven. Now, this includes the release of identities of shareholders and directors of the companies, and it also shows how wealthy individuals, including public officials, hid their assets from public scrutiny. And then at the time of publication, the papers identified 5 then heads of state of government from Argentina, Iceland, Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, and United Arab Emirates, as well as government officials, close relatives, associates of heads of governments, and just all over the world, like Hong Kong and the British Virgin Islands and those locations. And it has been labelled the biggest leak of its kind in history. And while the use of offshore business entities is not illegal in the jurisdictions in which they are registered, during their investigation, reporters found that some of the shell companies may have been used for illegal purposes, including fraud, drug trafficking, and tax evasion. So straight away, because of this, The Guardian and all other news outlets started reporting on this, obviously pointing aim at Putin and all the other boogeymen involved. And it really became a case of those who failed to look into it properly were fooled into believing that this was a genuine leak that exposed corruption in the world like never before. But for those that have researched it, it only took me about half an hour to discover the true intent behind the leak. And I wanted to briefly touch on that, but more importantly touch on the illusion of two sides that most people still, including that of the truth movement, tend to fall into so easily these days on either side of the fence. So first of all, just wanted to point out the main 2 points of why this is, a fraud for those who aren't aware, and then get into the discussion. So first of all, it was a company called Sudich Zitang which received the leaks, and they gave a detailed explanation on the methodology that corporate media used to search the files. So the main search that they'd done for names was associated with breaking UN sanction regimes, and as a result, you see countries on the list like Zimbabwe, North Korea, Russia, Syria, all of the countries that are painted as the boogeymen from Western perception to keep us in this trap were the ones that have been listed. So straight away, even those in charge of filtering the leaks, which was Zitang and the corporate media, admit to filtering the Mossack information, and there is no mention at all by massive Western corporations or Western billionaires, which are the main customers. And The Guardian, said that this material will remain private. So first of all, it's all being filtered just to show the boogeyman. There's no Western billionaires, there's no Western corporations, it's all just the other side of the story. And secondly, when you look at it, it's being managed by, and I laughed at the name of this, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is funded and organized entirely by the USA's Center for Public Integrity. Now, their funders include the Ford Foundation, Carnegie Endowment, Rockefeller Family Fund, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and Open Society Foundation, which is George Soros. So all we have here with the leaks is a pick and choose of what information is released by the filterers based on what serves the underlying agenda best, and a platform that publishes it, which is funded by the very same corporate interests the filters are protecting. So straight away, just wanted to get that out of the way. It is a complete joke, and I'm sure our listeners that have become up to date with this story, or anyone who has looked it up, will come to the same conclusions. Alrighty, now, the reason I wanted to touch on this, and I'll open up for a discussion now, was because I feel like this exemplifies the same old story that everyone seems to fall into these days, and that is the illusion, that all of this is real. All of this isn't a puppet show, all of this is stage. I mean, on one hand, as we know, we have the blue pills, and I hate referring to it as blue and red pill anymore, but I will just for the sake of, categorizing it. We've got the blue pills that still believe there's good and bad, Obama versus Putin, for example. But yet, on the other side, red pills, for the most part, are also being fed alternative information that also follows the same blueprint, just a different method of delivery. So, John, I'll you first, especially considering the journey you've taken of self-awareness since we started the show. What do you think of this notion that people are still, no matter how much they think they are informed, on both sides? So, for example, social justice warriors versus truth seeker, on both sides. How do you feel about this notion that they're still being led with a false narrative instead of truly thinking for themselves, like we have with this Panama leak? And how many people are really trying to dismiss any narrative and truly think for themselves these days?
Oh, I guess there's a couple of things there. Firstly, there's the Panama Papers themselves, and then secondly, there's a broader idea of the people and how easily fooled they are. So as far as the Panama Papers go, while you were talking, I was just doing some quick research into the official story of the Panama Papers, and it sounds like the basic story here is that some guy he leaked the information of all of these companies who are using some tax haven, and now that's having some kind of effect on the puppet show that is world politics. That seems like that's the rough summation there. So my first question would be, who believes? Well, you know what I'm trying to say here. Like what? So it's just some random guy decided to leak this to a newspaper, and the newspapers are on the side of the people, giving them information for good. I mean, it's just silly. But I guess that leads into your general question of why would people believe any of this? And I've said it before. I think it's simply a matter of you take a human being, give them 12 or 13 years of education, and then feed them hours a day of constant programming on their televisions, and you can make them believe just about anything. And most humans, once they've gone through that conditioning, the brainwashing, the programming, as I call it, most of them are never going to recover from it. And why would they want to? Because even if they do realize it's all just one big joke, that they're actually slaves, they're quite literally slaves, and that there's no real hope for them to better their life. If they do wake up to that, their friends and family don't. So they'll be very isolated, very alone, and humans don't want to feel isolated or alone. So it's better just to go along with the nonsense and just put it all to the back of their mind. And this is something that I had to learn the hard way. Doing this show, doing the ARP taught me this, how do I put this? Doing this show for a couple of hours a week, hoping to get information out there to people, and seeing people who are fairly intelligent do nothing themselves, just listen and do nothing themselves, not make any changes to their own lives, quite happy just to go along with things because they've kind of given up hope on this life or this existence. That sort of made me realize, hold on, most people, it's not about the truth, it's not about finding out how things really are, it's just about feelings, and if listening to a show makes them feel good, they'll do that. But ultimately, the idea of really doing their own investigation, their own research, they've got no interest. And I think the people who run the show, whoever they are, that's what they know that. They know that better than we know that most people simply won't do the research, so they don't really even have to hide that much information. Most of the information that brings these people down is out there already, but people just aren't willing to do the research. They'd rather read it in their newspaper that someone else has leaked something and someone got fired and just go on with their lives. And Lindsay, you've been listening to me for a couple of moments. Firstly, on the Panama Papers, what are your thoughts? And then the broader topic of why people believe this nonsense.
Yeah, I was going to bring the Panama Papers up as well, but obviously Ethan's done a lot more research than me, and I just had this gut feeling as soon as I heard it. I saw it on Four Corners, I think it was, and straight away I thought, no, this is, all they've done is they've sacrificed all the little fish. So obviously the big fish have decided, right, we're sick of the competition, we'll dump all this and get rid of all those little fish who are trying to, not pay a little bit of tax or whatever. And then when Ethan comes out and says it's Soros and the Rockefellers, yeah, all right, okay, we know now. To me, I hadn't done as much research as Ethan had done, but it just smacked. You could feel it. No, there's something's not right here. This just doesn't happen because these people own the newspapers, own the television. If it was going to hurt them, it wouldn't have come out at all. That was my first reaction. Secondly, yeah, I agree entirely with you. What do you do if people are just going to sit in front of the television all the time and believe what they see? It's difficult. I watch television, but I've got to watch myself or I'm going to have a heart attack because I keep getting angry every time when somebody comes out with something. I'm swearing at them and and that's no good either because I'll get blood pressure. So I don't know what the answer is. So I think Ethan's thing of turn off the TV is the right slogan. Just turn off the TV.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well,
that'll do.
Yeah, well, obviously, we saw this with WikiLeaks. Millions around the world came to see them as a beacon of light against corruption, if you want to say it that way. But what was really released on the website? We had Iraq files, Guantanamo files. All the stuff that we already knew was happening. There was no 9/11. There was no big banks, no media control, nothing that would really blow open this whole illusion. So once you go through the motions and you start to realize and you start to make yourself aware that WikiLeaks was just a part of the puppet show as well, you start to really question both sides of the story. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because we did pride ourselves on this show about encouraging people to think for themselves. And with this story, as I said, on one spectrum, you've got the blue pills. So they think Putin comes out in it. They just have another reason to hate Putin and the evil Russians and the evil Syrians. They're just following their narrative. But then on the other side of things, those who are so-called informed are saying that this is a blow open of corruption and this is a great thing. But when you look at the underlying mechanism, this was all just a plan. It was all just make-believe, and the ones that are behind it are feeding it for an agenda, and they're controlling both sides. And I think that is very relevant to what the world is like today, not just on the normal scale, but also in movements like this, in the truth movement, what people believe in terms of being the exact same blueprint of the ones that they're criticizing on the other side. So I thought that this story really just was a perfect example of everything that we embodied on the show, because we were just three blokes that said, don't believe what we're saying. We're just reading out the official story. We're giving our thoughts on it, but we encourage you to do your own research. Whereas a lot of people, especially on the truth movement side of things, try to tell you this is what the truth is, where we were trying to tell you to discover your own truth. And I thought that even though the Panama Papers is a small part of this, Jono, that it really just exemplified everything, because it's portraying everything that we spoke about, how you can be controlled on either side of the spectrum. And we just wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up, obviously, to encourage people to think for themselves again with the information presented.
But I mean, say with this Panama Papers thing, I'm being quite serious here. Up until today, I'd never even read a single article about it or seen a TV news segment. Now that I know a bit more about it, how is my life any different? Like, I'm at the point now where I'm like, if you want to pay attention to the news, all you're going to do is what Paul Lindsay does and get yourself angry about it. It's all just nonsense. At the end of the day, it's a distraction, and people who sit down and watch even 30 or 60 minutes worth of the news, that's 30 or 60 minutes they're never getting back. And ultimately, even if this Panama Papers leak was real, and even if it was a genuine expose of important information that could actually bring down important people, let's just pretend that was all real, how does it affect the average person? Like, why are they watching it on their TV at 6 p.m.? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can tell you. My youngest daughter put it encapsulated today when she said, "Oh no, the news is like Neighbours Go Mad," and I thought that's pretty much sums it up, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and that's why I was bringing up the story, because we're just looking at it. We always wanted to just observe from a third-person perspective about what's going on. This platform served as a way that we could discuss all of these ideas. But a lot of people out there that may be listening to this show for the first time they might still fall into this trap of believing the information that does come out. So using the Panama Papers as an example of how both the asleep and the so-called awake are both being controlled by two spectrums, whereas we're sitting here saying, look at this from an objective position, look at this from, as a way to awaken yourself inside about what you believe and what's being fed to you, and form your own perceptions off of that. That's exactly what we always wanted to try to do with the show. And as you said, Jono, why would it affect me? Well, I think the listeners and people out there that are so caught up in this story need to think about it for themselves as well, and really just try and understand the information that's being presented to them, and not formulate their own opinions on what everyone else is saying to them, John.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we've got a few topics we need to get through, so we'll move on to the next one. And what I want to do is just read out a couple of articles. Obviously, one of the things that we did focus on a lot during the first season of the show was cultural Marxism. This idea that there are people, some of them part of an identifiable group, who seem to want to psychologically and spiritually destroy the people of countries like Australia and they're doing it piece by piece, particularly through the education system and the mainstream media, slowly but surely making people think that there's no such thing as male and female, that there's no such thing as black and white, that there's no such thing as right and wrong, and worse than that, sort of enforcing this double think that George Orwell wrote about, where they'll get people to believe two completely opposite things at the same time. So let me start off. I've got one article here. This is from the Brisbane Times, which is owned by Fairfax up here in Brisbane. They've got an online-only publication. And this article, and of course we link to all of the articles on AusRoundtable.com, so people can go and check these for themselves as well. This one's called QUT Student Faces $200,000 Bill in Facebook Post Racism Row, published April 15, 2016. I'll just read the first couple of stanzas here. Quote, "A university student accused of racial discrimination over a Facebook post has amassed a hefty legal bill which could blow out to $200,000 if the case goes to trial. Alex Wood is being sued under the Racial Discrimination Act over a 2013 post he wrote after being asked to leave the Queensland University of Technology computer lab reserved for the use of Indigenous students. Just got kicked out of the unsigned Indigenous computer room. QUT is stopping segregation with segregation," he posted on a Facebook page called QUT Stalkerspace. The post attracted comments critical of both the incident and the existence of the Indigenous-only space. "I wonder where the white supremacist lab is," wrote another student, Jackson Powell, who is also being sued. The third student involved in the lawsuit, Callum Thwaites, has emphatically denied being responsible for a post that included a reference to some naughty word, and has produced a volume of evidence supporting his denial. The trio is being sued alongside the university and two staff by the administration officer who asked Mr. Wood to leave the room, Cindy Pryor. An Indigenous woman, Miss Pryor, went on sick leave following the incident and reports she felt unsafe leaving her home because she was afraid somebody would say something offensive to her. She also says she was unable to return to work in a role that required her to have face-to-face contact with white people. Ms. Pryor is seeking hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. Lawyers for the students have sought to have the case dismissed in the federal court, citing a lack of legal basis to contend their clients had breached the act and labelling the lawsuit an abuse of process. Judge Michael Jarrett has reserved his decision, end quote. And the article just goes on like that. So to summarise, there is a university here in Brisbane. I think it might be the second largest, certainly the second most prestigious in Queensland. It's called the Queensland University of Technology. And apparently they have a lab, a computer lab, that was reserved for Indigenous students. There was a non-Indigenous student in the room. He was asked to leave because he was non-Indigenous. He's posted a comment to Facebook saying that QUT is trying to end segregation with segregation. He's being sued for that. And then another person commented on that Facebook page words to the effect of, "Well, where's the white supremacist lab hat then?" He's also being sued. And the lady suing them was an employee of the university who's saying that she doesn't want to have to deal with white people face to face, and that after this incident, she was even scared to leave her house lest somebody said something offensive to her. Now, this is the article from Fairfax, who usually aren't the kind, like, they usually would be for what you would call progressive politics, so this doesn't seem like a polemic article. Is the article true or not? I'm not too sure. I've seen independent comments to the effect of this is actually true, this is happening at QUT, this is a legitimate story. But just on the surface of it, if we do take the story on face value for now, I'll throw to you first there, Ethan. Had you heard about this one? What do you make of it?
No, I hadn't heard about this one. Obviously, don't really pay too much attention to the news anymore, but I do know that similar things are happening in universities like this, especially across Queensland. Queensland's a terrible state for this in terms of just how far the cultural Marxism has really spread amongst, you know, the people that live in this small city that we're in. But this is this is just unbelievable. I mean, if you look at it, if we take it on face value and understand that this is happening within this university, I mean, obviously he's correct. You know, trying to stop segregation with segregation, and who are the ones that are being segregated in the 21st century? Well, it's certainly not the ones that are, you know, getting the most benefits. It's certainly not the ones that are benefiting from mass immigration, from, you know, all of these things that are happening that are trying to, you know, put this universal context across humanity, whether it be ideologically and in the physical as well. And who are the ones that are being segregated against with things like this? Obviously, John, you know the answer to that, and a lot of our listeners do as well. But it's when you're trying to question these things, obviously you end up in this position exactly like this student is in, and it's just terrible that we're descending down a path like this. But yeah, there's not too much more I can say. I'm just in shock, to be honest.
I'll go to you there, Lindsay. Obviously, you're a man who's lived quite a life and seeing the change here in Australia just in your lifetime. Even just a few decades ago, a city like Brisbane was predominantly a white settlement. That's what the population was. And in just a couple of generations now, not only has that changed markedly, but also what we're teaching the children at school, what the children are being taught at school is quite different as well. And white people are told that they're very privileged, that they didn't earn that privilege, their forebears did some terrible things that they should now pay for. And even to the extent of we're going to give non-white people their own rooms that they can study in or work at university. And if you complain, you do risk being sued in a court of law for offending people. It's fallen quite a far way in just a couple of generations, hasn't it?
Yeah, a very, very long way away. It's difficult to know what to say about this. There was a fellow, Mark Steyn, who gave a talk in Melbourne. I think it might have been in February, and he was a Canadian. And basically, his whole talk was about this sort of thing. And he'd been fighting something similar in Canada for 2 years, and he has them on the run. He said, "I haven't got the YouTube link to it, but we could find it and put it down the bottom of this recording." But it was very, very interesting because he was on the same tact into Canada, and the point he was making was you cannot let these people get away with it. Now, what you've got here is everybody's scared stiff because any little money that you've saved up, all you need to do is be taken to court, and you could lose all of that. I mean, the other side are not going to lose it because they've got all sorts of free legal aid to help them do this sort of stuff. But we as individuals will lose everything. We'll be stripped of all our assets. Even if it's tossed out of court, we'll still be stripped of most of our assets because that's what it'll cost us to maintain some sort of a defence. But the point he made, this Mark, was that we have to do it. We have to put a stop to it, and we have to turn the tide back. Now, all I can suggest to people is go and listen to him. He's a far better speaker than what I am, and he will enunciate what his plans are in that YouTube video. I agree with it, but at the same time, as individuals, I've seen individuals who've thrown all their money and time into this fight, and then they finish up broken, and then they just stop fighting after a while because they've got no money and they've lost their heart. So there's a happy medium somewhere. We must fight. We can't just be steamrolled, but at the same time we don't want to be destroyed as individuals. So it's a difficult problem, and people think, oh no, it's nothing. You're talking garbage. But no, this is for anybody who wants to say the truth in this day and age. It becomes quite a painful effort. I don't know what the answer is really. I think we need to listen to people who've like this Mark Steyn, and try and find a way through for the rest of us. Because every day of the week we're confronted with something similar to this. And if we react, bang, the next thing you know, you're in court. I don't know whether you think that's me overacting there, but I think it's happening to everybody. It's not just me, and it won't be just these fellows from the university. This will be happening on a daily basis, on trams, on trains, everywhere you go. So you've got to be careful. Anyway, I'll throw it back to you because you brought the topic up. I'll throw it back to you, Jono, and just see what you've got to say.
Yeah, well, I only read this one. I found this one on Reddit, which I do still peruse to try and keep my finger on the pulse. And I saw this article in there either today or yesterday, and I thought that one could be worth discussing because it goes to the heart of something that I talk about a lot, this cultural Marxism, this idea of telling people everything that you thought was right and wrong, they're actually legacy values left over from a time that was past, and it's all irrational, and actually there's no right and wrong, there's no male and female, there's no black and white unless we're giving special advantages to non-white people. and there's no white unless you complain about anything, and then we're going to say you've got white privilege or what have you. But we're going to enforce this idea that you pretty much have to accept that you're going to be a second-class citizen in a country that a couple of generations ago was almost entirely people like you. And it's not just happening here in Australia, it's happening all over the white Western world. And then, of course, you've got people like our old friend Barbara Specter saying that Europe hasn't learned to be multicultural yet, but it will learn, and that Jews like herself are going to be at the head of making this happen, and that for doing that, they're going to be blamed, but that's a risk they're happy to take because they want Europe to be more multicultural, and of course that just means they want to dilute the native white population there. This is happening, it's so in our faces and it's so obvious. It amazes me that more people don't speak out against it. And one thing, above many things, one particular thing I'm proud about, what we did with the ARP in that first season, was we did speak out against things like this, and I think a lot of our audience were happy to hear that others were speaking out against it, because most people are far too gutless to speak out against this, whether they're with their friends or their family or in a social setting. Most people, even if they know what we're saying, are far too gutless to ever say anything, and so they like to hear other people talking about it instead. But I think if and when more people start openly speaking out against this Marxist nonsense, and some of the people who are part of it, maybe we'll see the tide turn really quickly, because things that are this irrational and this crazy, it's not too hard to get people to see that there's a problem. The hard part is getting them to speak out against it. And if and when the tide turns, it'll turn quickly. I've got one more article that is in a similar vein that I wanted to read out. And this one is from The Age down in Melbourne. Once again, this is from Fairfax. And this was printed April 16, so yesterday, our time. And this one's entitled, Housing Groups Call for New Vacancy Tax to Fund Family Violence Programs. And I'll just read you out the first couple of stanzas of this one. Quote, properties that have been unoccupied for a substantial period would be taxed to boost support for women fleeing abusive homes under a proposal to be considered by the state government. As Premier Daniel Andrews works out how to pay for the recommendations made by the Royal Commission into Family Violence, housing and homeless experts have come up with an idea that could generate millions of dollars in additional revenue without hurting low-income earners. A vacancy tax. The proposal, modelled on a similar levy used in Britain and Canada, would involve taxing thousands of homes or apartments that have been unfurnished and unoccupied for a long time, such as many investment properties that are lying idle in the docklands and other parts of the inner city. The income generated from the scheme, estimated to be about $80 million a year, could then be used to fund affordable housing across Victoria for thousands of women and their children who are trying to escape the cycle of abuse from violent men. End quote. And it just goes on and on and on like that. So the summary here is that a new tax is being proposed in Victoria, our second most populous state, down there in the south, I guess southeast. And the tax will be on people who have houses that are left vacant. And the justification for the tax is that they're going to use that money to fund homes for women fleeing domestic violence. So, Lindsay, it's the old 2-for-1 deal. They get to keep pushing the domestic violence meme, and they get to tax the people more money. They get to do two at the same time. And guess what? The photo that they've got for the article, there's Premier Daniel Andrews, and who's standing right next to him? Old Rosie Batty from that Rosie Batty Australian of the Year, you know, my son got murdered by his dad hoax that happened a couple of years ago. So they've actually got 3 for the price of 1. Lindsay, with this particular article, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, before we came on, I was talking about to do with it. Yeah, you hadn't heard it because you hadn't listened to the news for a little while. But there was a lady who lost her, I think it was an 18-month-old child, who drowned in a river, or the body was found in a river, and she'd blamed a black African drunk who'd taken the child out of the pram and disappeared. And now it turns out, the last I heard, it looked like she was going to be charged with the child's murder. And I thought, where's this woman Batty now? You know, it was always male violence to females. Well, here's a female who they're thinking of charging for killing her own child, and there's no Batty saying anything anywhere. And it just, I thought, no, there's something's not right here. There's no balance. It is what you're talking about. It is a cultural Marxism in that it seems to be a plan to denigrate men. And it's flowing through now to the point where men are even scared to pick up their grandchildren or whatever, because people will be looking at them like they're some sort of pedophile, or, you know, it is permeating the whole of society. and we're pretending it's not, but it is. And something has to be done about it because it is unhealthy for a society where you have that sort of feeling all the time. And that's all I can say about it, yeah.
Well, if you think it's bad now, Lindsay, just imagine the fact that at schools today, children are being taught that gender roles are bad for them. They're a bad thing. The idea that there's a way that men should behave and there's a way that women should behave. Children across Australia right now are being taught that that's a bad thing and that that's all being broken. So if you think the men are gutless and weak right now, just wait till the next generation come through where they've even been told not to be men, and then they're told that the men who are like men, they're violent against women, they're a scourge. And you'll also notice, if you pay attention, say at the train stations around Brisbane, the posters that are saying we need to end violence against women, it's always white men for some reason. Ethan, you tell me, is that a coincidence?
Yeah, it's exactly right, John. And it's not a coincidence. And all of these little things, even though they're little stories, make up the bigger part of it, which is obviously the cultural Marxist agenda. And, you know, I spoke on Fair Dinkum Radio towards the end of last year before we entered the ARP, before we wrapped it up, about the UN, how they're talking about introducing universal law. And not just law in the context of actual laws that they're passing, but in the context of a universal train of thought and a universal mechanism on the physical level. You know, first of all, they developed the technology to connect thought so that everyone all over the world who may have had their own individual thoughts, their own cultures, are now connected by this universal train of thought that is filtered through the technology, filtered through the internet. Then they introduce it on the physical levels with the school. They train the thought. You know, they're bringing up now spot the jihadi. They're telling young children that genders are assigned and you can choose whatever gender that you want to be. You know, they're telling you that, you know, the white male is always the, you know, we're the most privileged and we need to learn about indigenous history and we need to show respect because we, you know, our forefathers were always bad, you know. So they implement it then, and then they also implement it in the physical with the mass immigration, with multiculturalism, and tell us that this is best for us. I mean, they're quite literally, at the moment, they're just playing God with the human race. They're completely molding our thought. They're molding our train, you know, our train of perception to accept that all of these things, even though little news stories like this build up the piece of the puzzle, but we're becoming indoctrinated to believe that this is the case through feminism, through domestic violence, through racism, through everything like that. All of these individual topics make up a grander scheme of things, and through this, you know, it just seems like the white Western world is at the mercy of this. And little stories like this just completely exemplify that, Jono.
Well, what I've been saying is that people are conditioned. It's programming. You give them 12 years with your child to fill their head with whatever nonsense they want, and then if they prove that they're good at regurgitating the nonsense, guess what? They get to go to university, and then it gets even worse again. And I'm only 28 years old, and I've seen things get dramatically worse on this front. This training of young people to believe, you know what? Just because you're a boy doesn't really mean you're a boy. In fact, maybe you'll be happier being a girl. When you take a step back from it, even if the parents who go along with this nonsense think they're doing the right thing by the children, when you take a step back and think about this, little human beings who need the elders in their lives, the adults, to help guide them, what they're being told instead is actually, we don't know what you are, you don't know what you are, you could be anything, you could be a boy, a girl, in between. And it's when you take a step back, it's actually utterly disgusting and reprehensible. And again, it comes back to this thing of a lot of people know that this is wrong, but they're too gutless to speak out against it. And I think one thing that all three of us can take a lot of pride in is the fact that, hey, we've got 50 episodes out there where you talked about things like cultural Marxism on a regular basis, saying, hey, there's people saying that white men are a problem. Where's their evidence for it? These people saying that white people don't exist when we're destroying them, but they do exist when we're suing them. These people, that they're a problem, and if you look through the list, and on and on and on it goes, and what's more, if you look far enough into it, a lot of the people behind all this nonsense, there's a common element which we did speak out against as well. And I was listening to a podcast recently, one of my listeners said, check out this guy, I forget his name, Australian Patriot. There's some Aussie dude who now lives in Thailand, but he does podcasts from what you might call an alt-right perspective, and even though he never talks about, from what I can tell, the root causes of the problems. He's got these interesting podcasts where when he comes back to Australia, he talks about what he observes when he comes back, because when you leave the bubble of a place like Australia and then come back to it later, that's when you can really see how quickly things are deteriorating. And even though he never identifies the root causes, it's interesting to hear him talk about the problems. And I was listening to one of these podcasts recently. He was saying that in Australia, a lot of the men now, say men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they've got this really odd sense of masculinity where they'll be covered in tattoos, or they'll be really big guys, like they'll go to the gym a lot. This is common now. If you go out to a club now, you'll be surrounded by guys who are covered in tats with huge muscles. However, when you see them in their private lives, they are pushed around by the women in their lives something chronic. The children don't respect them at all, and if they say anything, the women get arky with them because it's the women who run the show in the household. So he was talking about this perverse masculinity in Australia where it's like, you can get yourself covered in tattoos, you can get huge muscles, you can buy lots of shiny toys, whatever, you can be a masculine that way, but outside of that, there is no masculinity in this country. And I'm paraphrasing what he was talking about, but I thought, you know what? I never thought of it that way, but that seems pretty true to me. Most men in Australia today, I think, are gutless cowards, Ethan.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jono. And, I'm a lot younger in a lot of respects and still do go out and experience some of this life that's out there. And it's exactly what you're talking about. That's the first time that I've actually heard from that perspective. But when I think about all the people that I know that are in similar positions, or people that I know of that are in similar positions, you pretty much just described exactly what is happening. And as we mentioned, even though this is a small aspect of it, what we're doing is we're making women more masculine with feminism and reversing the gender roles. But even in the gender roles where physically they're still intact, ideologically they're being reversed as well within the household with things like this. And this is just another small element of this whole spectrum of cultural Marxism. And it really is sick when you think about it, about how people are methodically doing this to us. And I'm so proud that here on this show, we were able to get to the level where we were exposing things like this and presenting this information to people and connecting with like-minded people who are trying to oppose this, because we need to oppose it, as much as we can, because it is one of the most pressing issues that is happening at the moment with us, John.
Yeah, well, in the live chat, we've got more than 30 people watching live. Thank you all for coming out. Coast Foco told me the name of that podcast. He's called Reactionary Expat, and Coast Foco says he's a great speaker, and I agree. I think he's a good speaker. The issue is that it's one thing to talk about the problems, or what you might call the symptoms. It's one thing to do that, but then to identify the fact that there does seem to be a root cause, or at least a group of people who play a far overrepresented role in that root cause. That's another thing altogether. And I've never heard Reactionary Expat talk about that, but there does seem to be a small group of people where this is just part of what they do. They want to destroy psychologically and spiritually people who aren't part of their little in-group, whether it's a race or a religion or an ethnicity or whatever these people are. Those who aren't of them, they seem to want to destroy the fabric of their societies for their own benefit. And it's funny that in this particular case, not only are they pushing the violence against women meme, this, white men are dangerous, we need to build homes for the women to escape all these violent white men, but they're also taxing people more. And these same group of people, the usual suspects, they also love taxing more. Whether it's Labor or Liberal, blue or red, more and more taxes, more and more of your money going to these people. And in this case, they're justifying it as, we're going to take money from the wealthy who have vacant houses. We're going to take it from them and give it to these poor women who need, domestic violence shelters or what have you. But ultimately, it's still just another tax. And Lindsay, one of the things that you did really well on the show in that first season was you were talking about the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. And as you said, it doesn't matter who wrote that book. What matters is the book was written, and every prediction it makes is coming to pass, including the idea of just taxing the people more and more every year. Another tax here, another tax there. Maybe every now and then reduce one tax but increase a few others. Most people are so moronic, they don't realize just how much they're being taxed, and that it's getting worse. And eventually, all of your income will be taxed, Lindsay, and they told us they were going to do this more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there's been so many things that you just said that fit in. First of all, it's not just that they're, it's not sick that they're doing that to us. No, they're at war with us. We just don't realise, well, you and I do, but the vast majority of people don't realise that these people are at war with us. And if you go and read some of the the basic texts on warfare, they all say it's far better to conquer these people without fighting them. If you can find a way to conquer them without fighting them, that's the ultimate in military technique, and that's exactly what they're doing. You can see it a mile away. One of the other things you were talking about, I was listening to something, and I didn't see the show, but apparently Germaine Greer was getting stuck into these what do they call it, where they're transgender people, because it was upsetting her idea of feminism or something like that, and they all came down on her. And I thought, talk about justice or karma or something like that. But even when she suddenly realised that she's disposable, she was good for them when it comes to destroying men in general and our culture in general. And now that there's something that's come up that she doesn't like, now they'll destroy her. And I thought a lot of these politicians need to have a look at that, because that's what's going to happen to them. These people will use whoever they can use, and then they'll throw you. You'll finish up on the rubbish heap. And it's just part of their warfare. And we've got to come to understand that. As far as you were talking about the tax, that's exactly what happened. But one of the things that I have in the back of my mind is, if you go and read something about the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, part of that was they couldn't get justice. Doesn't matter what they did, they couldn't get justice. And the second thing, they were being overtaxed. And they revolted. And the first thing they did was cut off every lawyer's head they found. Now, at that time, a lot of the lawyers were also churchmen, but they hacked their heads off with axes or whatever they could find. And they finished up with a king in the Tower in London. Now, as it turned out, they were suckers, and they followed the king when they let him out, and they agreed, oh yes, you can be our king again. Well, of course, he went round and they hanged all the leaders of the revolt. But I suspect that if they push us far enough, there will be another peasants' revolt, and they won't like it. And there aren't very many of them.
Just on that one, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, so we're talking 600 years ago. Yeah. Do you trust any of the history from that far back?
I do on that one, yeah.
Yeah. Can I tell you why I don't?
Yeah.
Because I can see them rewriting history right now. So even while people have access to computers to double check the nonsense they're being told, they're still able to get away with rewriting history today. So how could it be that history from 600 years ago hasn't been manipulated or fabricated? And when I hear stories about the Peasants' Revolt, it's easy to think, well, there is proof that in the past the people have stood up for themselves and taken on the people who are running the show. Like, it has happened in the past, so if they just push us a little bit further, maybe it'll happen again. But then I think, man, if I was running the show, that's a story I'd want people to believe. I'd want them to believe that, well, there was a point in the past when we went a bit far with things and you stood up against us, and we wouldn't want that to happen again, so we won't push it too hard this time. That's what I want people to believe, because then people just keep waiting for that next Peasants' Revolt. Whereas I would be asking Lindsay, what proof do we really have that the people have ever stood up against this nonsense?
Well, it's a bit hard to answer you on a show like this. I'll have to go away and do the research on it and find out what books they were and when they were written, all that sort of thing.
But to get where I'm coming from, like just generally,
we've discussed this.
I look around at the people. I look around on the bus. I look around at the places I frequent, and I see a bunch of people who are completely and utterly moronic. And now you will say, well, they've had 12 years of education, they watch a lot of TV, they've been programmed to be moronic, and I completely agree with you. The problem is, I don't have any proof that before all of this, people weren't still moronic, just believing different moronic things. I'll throw it in there, Ethan. Can you see what I'm saying here? I'm no longer convinced, and I guess this will almost make a nice segue into just a broader discussion about our show, but I'm really no longer convinced that the average person is capable of standing up against anybody at all, especially when it comes to matters of principle. What say you?
Yeah. A few things to touch on. I think they're certainly not able to do it in the state that we are. I definitely do think that somewhere inherently within inside of us we do have that tendency to do that, to stand up against things that are wrong against us. The problem is that we've been completely reinvented as a race, pretty much, by the people that control us, and the human spirit that's been inside of us has been completely suppressed through everything, through working, every day, through technology, through, entertainment, through everything that's happened. We've reached a point now where they can just tell us what we're doing, they can just laugh in our face, and people are still not going to do anything. And it really begs the question of how far do they have to push humanity before they do something? And it seems like that's getting slimmer and slimmer every day. So I see your point, Jono, in terms of that. I personally think somewhere deep down it's there, but until we break the conditioning, we're not going to be able to do that. So I agree with you, and also believe that we can make a difference as well. In terms of the big spectrum, you know, exactly right. This is where we've gone down, and you and I have taken a similar path in this respect about all the information. Where does it come from? You know, if I was looking at history, I always ask the question, if I was scripting it all and if it never did happen, sure, I'd include things like slavery, sure, I'd include things like that to say, hey, look, there was a time where it was worse, so you don't have to, you know, you don't have to feel like this is a bad time, you know, it used to be a lot worse. But then on the other side, I try to question, why would they include stories like this to even give us the notion that we could rise up, if that makes sense? You know, why wouldn't you just keep it to why not just keep it to a narrative where times were worse, but we've changed from now, without including stories of people doing that, to give the notion to people like yourself, to give notion to people like Lindsay, give the notion to people like myself and listeners that we can stand up because it has happened before, regardless of whether it's real or not. Now, I don't even have any evidence to suggest that any of these things happened back then. You know what I mean? I don't even know what to believe today as opposed to yesterday, and I'm observing the current present state that the world is in, and I don't even know what to believe today. So regardless of whether it is real or not, I always just question those two things. Why would they include stories like this if it was fabricated? Because I personally wouldn't. And until we break the conditioning, we wouldn't be able to replicate something like that going forward. Does that make sense, Jono?
Yeah, it does. And I'll throw that one to Lindsay. Lindsay, you tell me, according to the story of the Peasants' Revolt, what happened in the end of that story?
They were rounded up and hung.
Yeah, and so I think that could be a hint there. It's like, you know what? There was a time in the past when people revolted, so we're going to try and avoid that happening. But if it ever does happen again, it might just end the way it did before, with the leaders getting hung. So it's still, you can still see how that'd be a very effective method for almost like trauma-based mind control. It's like, guys, we can't be too bad to you because, hey, you haven't revolted yet. But the last time people did revolt, they just got hung anyway. So why don't you go back to work, go back to sleep, keep buying your shit, send your children to our schools, don't worry, we'll take care of them. Then when you get sick, don't worry, we'll give you a pension, we'll take care of you. So after you work for us for 40 or 50 years, you'd want to hope that we're still in charge for your retirement because we're the ones taking care of your pension. So just stay in the system, stay where you are, don't even think about revolting. You don't need to revolt, everything's fine. And if you ever do think about revolting, just remember what we told you about last time that happened. Can you see where I'm going with this, Ethan?
Yeah, certainly, and excuse my ignorance, I didn't know how that actually ended. I was sort of going off of the basis that it was a revolt that was successful. Obviously, now that I know that, I completely see where you're coming from in terms of how that could also be something that would be constructed, obviously, as a way to induce fear into the subconscious of people in terms of what the narrative is. But I still question in terms of other stories, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know whether history is real or not, but for me, if I was constructing history, I'd construct it as either a utopia, so that people know that times used to be better than this to try and get us out of this, which they're somewhat doing in that respect, or I would construct it as a time where things used to be awful, as we've just mentioned, and that's why you shouldn't see things as bad now. But I still do question those stories throughout history where humanity has been successful, how we have stood up against greed. If I was in control, I wouldn't even give humanity the notion that they could do that, whether it's real or not, to be able to do that. So I still question that, but I'm still more leaning towards the skeptical side of things in terms of I don't know what to believe. And I've reached a point in my life now, John, where I've never known so little about things, but I've never known so much because of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see where you're coming from. You're saying, well, why would they even give us a sniff of hope? If they're making up all of these stories, why would they do that? You know, I used to spend a lot of time referring to George Orwell's book 1984. And in that one, at the end of his interrogation, Winston says, well, was there really a resistance? Because Winston he thought that he was getting to join the resistance. He hated the system. He thought he was getting to join the resistance, and then it turned out he wasn't. He'd been sort of double-crossed. But then at the end of his interrogation, he's like, well, was there a resistance to begin with? And then the guy running the show was like, you'll never know. Like, you never even get to know if there was one or not. Because if you knew that there was one, you'd try and join it. If you knew that there wasn't one, you'd try and start it. So we're going to leave you in this grey area where you don't even know if there is a resistance. You're better off just going back to work. And, of course, what happens to Winston in the end? Well, there he is, sitting there drinking his gin, watching the TV, and believing that his country has just scored another great win against the evil empire. So I'll go to you there, Lindsay, and then we'll put a line under this particular part of the show. Can you see why I'm sceptical, not just the Peasants' Revolt, but even in the live chat, Coast Foco said, well, the Jews have been kicked out of hundreds of countries. I used to believe that too. I no longer do believe stuff like that at all. I'm not sure that any evidence has ever been presented to me that that's actually ever happened. I can see why it made sense to me to believe it in the past and why it fit in with my worldview at the time. But now it doesn't fit in with what I know about other events in history. It doesn't fit in with what I know about what history actually is. But more than all of that, I've seen no evidence that the Jews ever were kicked out of any countries, let alone hundreds. What say you?
Okay. First of all, when you have all these cathedrals spread throughout the whole of Europe that appear to be not modern buildings, would you concede that they've been built in the past?
Sorry, Matt, I was on mute there.
Okay.
Well, obviously the buildings were built in the past, but how far back?
Yeah, well, exactly. But, you know, they're obviously not modern buildings. So somewhere or other there is a history. So you can go back and you can look at a cathedral and say, yeah, that was a fairly old building. And you can even go and look at the moss covering on the rocks, and they can determine, you know, how many hundred years old by the thickness of the moss and things like that. Were they Christian buildings, or were you know, what were they? Were they some sort of satanic buildings, or, you know, there's got to be some reality that you can determine. You can't just be nihilistic and say, you know, nothing exists, no, there was no history, that sort of thing. You've got to be able to have some way of determining where you came from and what your past culture was. You can't just discount everything.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying you don't want to be nihilistic, you can't dismiss reality. I completely agree with you. I think the reality that we have is the reality that's in front of us right now. That part, we can prove it's self-evident truth, but the moment we start going back through history, well, whose history are we going back through? And if we all agree that these people run the show, they run the school systems, they run the mainstream media, they control people's minds that way. If we all agree about that part, why wouldn't we agree that they also control history? And that's what people like George Orwell, I mean, he wrote that book in the late 1940s, just after World War II. And what happens in that book? Well, the main character, his job is literally to rewrite history. Do you see what I mean? And I mean, that's the book. I
understand that. But what I'm trying to get at is, you've got some physical things. You know, you can go and dig under the ground, and then there are artifacts under the ground in stone and things like that you can refer to, that'll have certain markings on them, and there is some physical history. Now, what spin you put on that is a different matter, but there is some physical history. You can't sort of say, oh, all history is false. Well, no, some of it might be, and some of it might not be. That's what I'm saying to you.
Yeah,
now,
I completely agree.
The second thing, when you're talking about the current affair, there was a fellow down in North Star, which is just in the northern New South Wales area, probably south from Gundawindi, or in that area, and he recently shot a public servant who was coming round and was threatening him over land clearing or something like that. Now, he killed the man, and he's in jail. But the government now has absolutely, completely changed the whole land clearing system. They got the message, and that's what it took. Now, I'm not advocating shooting all public servants, but apparently this fellow had been standing over lots and lots of people, and that's what happened to him. And it's changed things. So these people are susceptible to threats. There are only a small number of them, and as long as they can bluff us, they will. But when somebody is prepared to say, I don't care about my life anymore, I will die in jail, and I will put a stop to you, if they think that's coming, it's a bit like the Japanese Zero fighters. How do you fight a man who doesn't care whether he lives or dies? It's very difficult. And that's what will come down to the likes of us eventually. We'll get to the point where we've had an absolute gutful of these people, and we will be prepared to die, and they won't be able to do anything with us at all. That's my view of it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And at the risk of getting too existential at this point in the show, there's a fair question about, well, how come we're all trained that death is such a bad thing anyhow? I mean, you think about it, you go to a funeral, and it's usually a pretty sad thing, and everyone's upset, and we all go there expecting to be upset, and it's this mourning and grieving process that's ingrained to us because, hey, that person's worse off now, or we're worse off without them, or, death in our culture, in our society, it really is seen in a really bad way, and we're told that either you're going to heaven or to hell, but you're leaving all of this behind, or you're told that nothing happens and you cease to exist. Either way, that's not a very good thing. That's not a very good way to view death, is it? So you fear death, and when you fear death, like you said, Lindsay, who are you going to stand up against? Nobody. Whereas if the people didn't fear death, then maybe there'd be more of them standing up against the people who are running the show. But I don't want to get into all of that too much just now. We'll draw a line under what was meant to be about cultural Marxism and turn into a much broader discussion about history and historiography. In the live chat, they do make a good point. They're saying, JLB, how do you know that George Orwell wrote that book? Well, firstly, I don't know that he wrote that book, and even if he did, the story is it wasn't George Orwell, it was Eric Blair. But did Eric Blair really write that book, and did he really write it in the 1940s? I don't know. Those are fair questions. But even if we just take it on the surface of it, the surface story is, the official story is, that even 67 years ago, they were telling us, more or less point blank, we rewrite history. And that's not hard for you to prove that yourself if you just pop into your library and borrow a book and read it. And I think that's one of the great problems with this so-called truth movement, is the vast majority of people involved do no actual original independent research. They do no real genuine digging or thinking. They don't share any of what they find with the people anyway. That most of the people in the so-called truth movement don't even have their own YouTube channels. So they've got this amazing tool in front of them, the internet, and YouTube, a free platform to share what you find. You can even get free video making programs for your computer. So anything that you do find, you can share with the world quite easily and quite cheaply. But most people don't do it. And there are libraries full of books that contradict one another that would be very easy for people to expose if they took the time. Most people aren't really interested, even the ones who know they're being lied to, in exposing the lies. And I guess we'll use that as a way to just kick off a broader discussion about not only the ARP in the past, but in the future, ourselves, our own plans, the way that we see this so-called truth movement going. Let's have a broader discussion, shall we, about our thoughts on all of this. I'll go straight to you there, Ethan. A broader discussion about all of this. Take it away.
Yeah. Where do you want to start in terms of the movement, in terms of ourselves? What do you want to kick off with first? Obviously, have a more impromptu, just natural chat at the moment. But
yeah, whatever's first on your mind, mate. Let's get the ball rolling.
Yep, too easy, mate. For me, the ARP, obviously, for all of us, looking back on it now, I was telling people that we're doing a reunion show, and I started to, think about the ARP and what it was like going through it, and to me, it become, a lot more than just doing the show. You know what I mean? Yourself and I, Jono, and even Lindsay as well, we went through a massive transformation in terms of what we believed, about how we saw life, about our own self-awareness, about the entire world around us, and feeding off of each other every single week was something that built upon that, even though towards the end the information became secondary in that approach. It became a good platform for us to obviously get our thoughts out and do all of that. And since the show ended, I've always been a very spiritual person, and discovering some of these new self-truths, if you want to call it that, about what I believe about the world around me and everything like that is all I've been focused on lately. I mentioned that I did obviously go out and get a job and do all of that, but it still didn't diminish anything away from it. I still don't view that as something that is central to my life. That what is central to my life is experiencing life in general, whether it be through a job, whether it be through a show, whether it be through anything. And I'm just focused now, and I'm focused on going forward about continuing my journey of self-awareness. And we talked a lot, Jono, about how we can look back, at episode 1, episode 2, episode 30. We can look back at any of these episodes and probably have a different perception on things than we did then. because we did every week. It was changing every single week, incrementally, even if we didn't know it. But we can look back now and say, even though I do have a different perception on that, I've built upon that, and that's all I'm focused about going forward. Whether we kickstart the ARP again, wherever we end up. That's just my underlying goal with everything, and I think a big part of this show was we encouraged people to also go on that journey of self-awareness. We talked about information like this, about not believing anything, not questioning just because of other people questioning because you want to question things, and discovering information yourself throughout this journey. And whether or not we continue with the show, whether or not we go forward, I think that's what I'm going to focus on, and I'll probably look back at this show and say, there was things I believed on that show I don't believe now. I think it's a constant process of self-awareness, Jono, and I think that this show has helped with that, and it's just I'm just glad to be back with you guys, having a chat about these things, and I hope that somewhere you sort of feel the same about the journey as I do.
Oh man, I've said on our season finale that this show had been so good for me personally in so many ways. So I've certainly got no regrets, even though if I were to go back and listen to the first few episodes, there are certain things where it might not necessarily be that I disagree with what I was saying, but I just question why I would even spend that much time looking into certain things. I mean, the official narrative, at the end of the day, is just the official narrative. It's not necessarily even a good starting point for investigation, even if you spend a few hours debunking the official narrative. Well, so what? It was the official narrative. Whereas if you just focus on self-evident truths and questioning things yourself, internally and externally, that seems to me to be a better starting point. So it's not so much that I disagree with anything that we said in the past. I'm sure there are some things I do. It's more that my focus now has changed so dramatically to the point where if we were to keep doing the show the way that we used to do it, I'd have to watch the news, and I don't want it. I don't like the news. It's a waste of my time. It's not that it makes me angry or anything. It's just that A, it's a waste of my time, and B, it does remind me of the fact that most of the humans I'm surrounded by are complete and utter morons, and that's not a nice thing. It's not something that I like to be reminded of, that most people actually believe this crap. They actually think the TV is their friend. They think the government is their friend. It's not nice. I don't enjoy being constantly reminded of just how utterly moronic these idiots are, but that's the case. And so having to watch the news and read the news, it's always at the back of my mind. I might be reading this for the entertainment or for the ability to debunk it and show that these people are lying, but most people aren't. They actually believe this crap, and it's, I think, on a spiritual level, giving the news any of your attention might not necessarily be the best thing for you. I'll say more about that in a moment, but Lindsay, I'll go to you there. As focus on anything you like, the broader idea of a truth movement. Obviously, you've been involved in this kind of thing with the Inverall Forum going back years. You've always had an interest, I guess, in independent research and thinking and what have you. What are your thoughts at the moment, 2016, even just the state of Australia and the way that we are right now? I mean, what are your thoughts generally? Take it away.
Okay, I'm quite appalled at the state of Australia. You were alluding to it earlier on. I can remember coming back from Papua New Guinea as a 22-year-old, and it was a white Australia. If you saw somebody who looked like a Thursday Islander or a Papua New Guinean in Brisbane, you could quite justifiably go and say, what the hell are you doing here? Where it's completely changed now. Now I go to my local supermarket, and I would say at least 50% of the population are Islanders or Indians, or, you can go through who that. There are only 50% of it who are probably from an Anglo or European background. So the whole thing has been completely changed. And the number of things I see too are the number of people who are now having mixed marriages. So if you go back to Spain, Portugal, or Greece, or any of these other places that this has happened in the past, within a couple of generations, they will be a swarthy population in general. There won't be any more white people. And this is what this whole, we were talking before about when I was talking and saying we're at war. We just don't know it. They're at war with us, but we just don't know it as a population. They will have defeated. There will be no white people. They will have destroyed us. And they know that they can control all the other groups because they've done it in the past. So that's how I view it. So we really are in a downward spiral. I don't know where it will end. I really don't know where it'll end. I know in other places like New York and what have you, you have this white flight that they talk about, where people start pulling out and moving into the centre of the country, and I think people are already doing that here. There are places near Toowoomba and elsewhere where you have whole communities who are white. Now, I don't know whether they've purposely done that or whether the other races don't want to go those places, or I'm not sure what's happening. But it becomes a difficult situation, because when I meet people, I don't have anything against these people. It's just that it is destroying the white people, and it's purpose-driven. It's not something that's just happened haphazardly. You don't find it happening in China or Korea or Japan or whatever, that whites or everybody else are going in there and completely messing up their culture or their bloodlines. It's just happening to us. So it is warfare. You've got to start and open your mind up and look at it and say, yeah, there is a war on against us to destroy us. Where it'll go, what'll happen, I don't know. I try to remain positive. Otherwise, you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't be bothered coming on a show. You wouldn't be bothered, doing YouTube videos or putting out posters in people's letterboxes or anything else that people do. You wouldn't be bothered. So I don't know what the answer is. I just try to remain positive. But whether I'm just being delusional or not, I don't know. That's pretty much how I am at the moment.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And for me, I do what I do because I believe it's right. And I can't necessarily prove that it's right, but I believe that it is, and that's why I do what I do. Even if I could look into a crystal ball and see that 50 years from now, things have deteriorated further and that the white people were almost extinct and, male and female were banned words that no one were allowed to even use anymore, which isn't as ridiculous as it sounds, by the way, when you look at just how far we've fallen and how quickly. I mean, if you showed me a future that went where it would appear to be going, it wouldn't stop me doing what I'm doing. I'm still doing this because I believe it's right. I believe, and again, I can't prove this, that ultimately we will all be judged. And it might be just ourselves judging our own lives on our deathbeds when we're 50, 60, 70, whatever age we might happen to be, even if that judgment is simply us looking back and saying, did I speak out against the nonsense that was happening? Did I stand up for the little children who couldn't stand up for themselves? Did I do any of my own research and put anything out there that helped people who were looking for information? Did I do anything? Even if it's just us judging ourselves, I want to be able to look back and say, you know what? I took the time to go and read some books. I took the time to do some investigation. I took the time to make some podcasts or to make some videos to put my thoughts out there. And yeah, they might have only been listened to by a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people, but at least I did something which most people don't do. And so I'm doing this because I think it's right. Do I think that there's ever going to be some great revolution, intellectual or otherwise, where people come to their senses and realize that they've been lied to by the people who run the show and realize the government's not their friend? No, I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not sitting here saying, yeah, man, we're going to take over the world. I used to believe that kind of stuff, but now I've seen too many people who know enough to know better who still do nothing, and to me, they're the real problem. The masses, the dumb masses who actually believe that TV is their friend and that school is for their benefit, they're beyond hope at this point. But the people who know that there are lies taking place and that little human beings right now, I mean, what's today, Sunday? Tomorrow morning there's going to be little human beings who are going to be getting told male and female are just social constructs and real, like they're getting brainwashed and you know it and you're not saying or doing anything about it. To me, those people, and they know who they are, and some of them are listening right now, to me, they're the problem. They're the ones who need to be doing something if there's any hope, and they're doing nothing and they know it. And to me, that's far worse than the dumb masses who don't know any better. Ethan, can you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely, Jono. And a big approach that I've been doing, as I mentioned, is just focusing on myself. And I take a lot from what you and Lindsay just said in respects to what we're doing. I used to, and I'm sure a lot of us used to have this vision that, yeah, we'll do the shows, we'll do the websites, we'll start to gain masses, and we'll start to take things. If no one's going to do it, we'll take matters into our own hands and take over things. But I don't think that that's the way we're supposed to go about it. I think it's all about, as cliche as the quote is, changing yourself before changing the world. Because your world is your world. Everyone has their own different world. It's not, we're trying to be convinced that there's this collective there's this collective world that's happening where everyone thinks alike, where everyone does the same thing. But once you harness the true individual inside of yourself, I think that's where you can really change the world. And through my approach, similar to you, Jono, I think putting out the information there is the right thing to do. You know, I do everything to ensure that this information gets out there, but I'm no longer going to try and force people through the door. I'm going to open the door. We're in the room. If you want to come into the room, the door's open, but we're not going to push you into the room. I'm focusing on myself in this room. I'm focusing on what I need to do. You know, vote with your money, people. You know, you don't support these big corporations. Stand up for things that are right in your own life. Turn off the television. Explore your own personal, spiritual journey, because I also do believe that, you know, one day we'll be judged, whether it is by some higher deity or whether it is just by ourselves. You know, the best thing that you can do is do everything that you can. And everything that you can is not spent burning out trying to change the world and trying to get others to think the way that you do. It changes by affecting yourself, affecting your family around you, affecting the local community around you, and looking after those that are a biggest part of your life. And you are the biggest part of your own life as well. It's about looking after yourself and doing these things. And I think that if every single person out there spent more time focusing on themselves, focusing on breaking these paradigms that have been constructed in their heads and building from new, really discovering who they are and really discovering how they can make a difference on both spectrums of the level, I think that's where we could have effect, because everyone doing something will change everything. Not one person can do everything, but everyone doing something amounts to that. So just following on from what you said, John, and that's the perception that I've taken from things, and I hope even if people don't agree with that, that they take that information in and do what they want. And that was ultimately the goal with the ARP, just to present information out there, to bounce ideas off of each other and allow people to, you know, construct their own thoughts from it.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of stuff in there. When you say that people need to focus on themselves more, like, isn't it kind of the case a lot of people are already far too focused on themselves, though?
Yeah, I mean in terms of really focusing on yourself. I'm more talking towards people that are self-aware, or they've at least broken the paradigm to understand that the world's not the way that it is. Certainly people focus on themselves through their lives, through material goods, and trying to get above the next person in their job, and, you know, a dog-eat-dog world. Everyone's focusing on themselves. But I mean more focusing on yourself in terms of really you know, looking after yourself on a spiritual level, looking after yourself in a physical level. All these people out there want to talk about fluoride, GMOs and stuff, but they'll still pull into Macca's and get their cheeseburger. You know, they still haven't got a filter in their house. You know, they're still allowing their aunts and uncles to not have filters in their house. You know what I mean? So if people spent more time actually affecting real change in their own lives and those around them, it's going to have far more an effect than you trying to go out there and change the entire world without changing the inner circle around you first. And that's what I'm really focusing on, is focusing on myself as an individual in a positive way, and flipping that, and not allowing the news, not allowing all of this information to affect and get inside of my inner bubble, but observe all of this from a third person perspective, and formulate my own thoughts and put them into practice locally around me, Jono.
Are they mutually exclusive, though? Like, is it possible to improve your own life while simultaneously sharing the new information you've come into possession of, or the new ideas that you've come up with people at the same time? I'll give you an example. As you start to investigate things that you never even thought to question, and you start to realize that there are epic lies being told, you can use that information to improve your own life by firstly not getting sucked in, but by secondly using that newfound skepticism in other areas of your life where it might help you. And while you're doing that, you can share that with the people around you, such as using tools like the internet, and say, hey guys, I used to believe this nonsense, now I don't, I've improved my life. You might want to look into this too, and hey, if you can find the evidence that I couldn't find, I'll change my mind. But if you can't find the evidence that you took for granted, maybe it'll improve your life as well. Is it possible that it's not really a mutually exclusive thing? We can actually help ourselves while helping others, and a lot of people just aren't doing that.
Yeah, exactly right, and that's exactly what I'm trying to say. You know, I've spoken to truth seekers that, you know what I mean, they've spent their whole lives, you know, not working, they've just stayed at home off of a welfare payment, just spending hours writing articles, hours making videos with the hope that they're going to change everything. But they've found a new joy by going to that corporate job, by working their way up the ladder, and now they can provide a better income and a better life for their family and the people around them in a time where they're trying to crush us like this. So that's just one individual approach about how that is beneficial. And do I agree with that? I don't know. I don't know if that's the right or wrong thing to do, but all I know is that that person feels that that's the right thing to do for them, and it's ultimately making them happier going forward. And it's changing the lives of people around them. Even if it's not a physical direct change, it's changing it by improving the circumstances and by improving the living conditions around you, both spiritually and mentally through that. And that's one individual approach. My individual approach is obviously looking after myself, looking after the people around me. Other people, they might not be able to get that message out to people. They might just put information on the internet. But I think we get sucked too much into the trap of allowing it to take over ourselves and not putting ourselves first, that we sort of miss the message with these things. We sort of miss the message that the first thing that they want to do is destroy us as individuals, destroy us spiritually and mentally. Lindsay was talking about people that have dedicated their lives to this and have ended up broken, burnt out. There needs to be that medium in between. And the medium first starts with breaking down your own perceptions of things, your own life around you, dismissing all information that comes to you, and really just search and feel out what you believe is the truth, and going from there and improving yourself, changing the world around you, and then whatever path that you take, changing the ultimate inner circle around you. And if everyone did that, things would change very quickly. Do you sort of get what I mean with that?
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to convey to you is this idea that it's not a binary of, well, you can either try and help everyone else or you can help yourself. I think the best way to do either is doing both at the same time. And I'll give you one example. I used to believe that you need to eat meat to get protein. I used to believe that, right? And then it dawned on me I had no evidence for that. Couldn't find any evidence for that. So I cut eating red meat out of my life. I seemed to be fine. In fact, I seemed to be better off than I was when I was eating the meat. So then I cut out the white meat as well. I cut out the chicken anyhow to start off with. And so slowly but surely, I've been undoing not only the belief system I used to have, I've been undoing the behaviors that followed from that belief system. And if I can continue this and continue to feel healthier for doing it, then I can go out there and say to people, hey, listen, I used to believe that you have to eat meat. If you're working out and running and what have you, you need to be eating the meat to let your body regenerate. But I looked into it, couldn't find any evidence that that was true. Started living my life in a different way. I'm better for it. Now that I've done that, now let me share that information with you. It seems to me that would be the best way to go about it. And I think a lot of people out there, they're not trying to improve their own lives, and or they're not trying to share the improvements they've made with other people. And I think that's one of the big problems. Those of us who know that we have been lied to, we're either not changing our own belief systems, our own behaviors, or we're not sharing what we've found and the research that we've done with others in any meaningful way. And I think that you can do both. And we're blessed to have people like Lindsay with us who've spent years and years and years trying to get his information out there, speaking to people, doing his own research, etc. He knows far better than you or me, I guess, the pros and the cons, the double-edged sword of doing this kind of thing. Lindsay, why don't you tell us, in your experience, the amount of time that you've put into all of this, have you gotten enough out of all of this to make it worth the sacrifices?
Not really. I think you summed it up before in that you've got to do what you think is right, because in the end you're going to end your life and you'll think, what a waste that was. I should have done this. Well, I don't want regrets. That's just the way it is. I don't want regrets. So I've got to do it properly now. That's how I feel anyway. Can I also touch on one of the things you were talking about before? It's been my experience talking to other people that instead of trying to convince people about something, it's far better if you do it yourself and they look across at you and then they want to copy you. There was an instance in America where this fellow was running a closed account on his treasury account or whatever, and he was living the life of Riley, wasn't having to work, not pay bills or whatever, and other people looked at him and wondered what he was doing and then inquired of him, and they were far more willing to copy what he was doing than if he was going around saying to them, I don't pay tax, I don't pay this, I don't pay my bills. Yeah, and I think that principle is there. You just do it yourself, you do the best you can, and then if others look at you and they want to copy you, they will. If not, you're not going to convince them anyway. That's how I view it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, I'll tell you what, we are coming towards the end of the show, so it's probably worth now just spending the last little segment, I guess, sharing our thoughts, having a chat live on the air, who cares, why not, about our thoughts on the show. The way that I see it is, if there was enough support for this, I'd be happy to do a show like this once every now and then, not every week. It was too much of a time commitment. And the way that we format the show, again, I'm just not really that interested in following the news closely enough. So there might be, I guess, some room to move, maybe even in rejigging the format a little bit. We can talk about these things as we go. But if there was support, I'd be more than happy to do a show like this every now and then. I still think there is an audience for it, especially here in Australia, where there is a complete and utter dearth of genuine independent media and people speaking out against the nonsense. But there are lots of people who do think similar things or question similar questions. So I think there is a market out there, especially here in Australia, for people who are interested in hearing this kind of thing and maybe exposing themselves to new ideas. Am I willing to put a few hours a week into it like we were doing in the past? I mean, between doing the podcast, rendering the MP3, uploading the MP3, putting together the website with all the links, that was a huge time commitment that we were all putting in last year, especially for myself. If I did the maths, it probably would have been working out to somewhere between 5 and 10 hours a week. And I think I've done that now, that 50-episode season. I'm very proud of. I think all three of us should be, as should the guests who came and made it what it was. But I'm not presently interested in putting that much time into it at the moment. But I think there is scope for shows like this, maybe once every now and then. And I'm certainly open-minded to it. I'll throw it to you first, Ethan. What are your thoughts on the ARP now that it's been 6 months? You've had time to reflect on it. What are your thoughts going forward? What are your plans as far as independent media is concerned?
Yeah, a couple things. As I mentioned, just going forward for myself, just focusing on what we were talking about before. I think we all said the exact same thing. We were just giving different examples, but just focusing on myself and how I can affect the positive change on myself to the world around me, and to put it out there. And if that means that people want the Australian Roundtable, to return, I'd be up for that. It probably wouldn't be a weekly show, because by the end of it, we were just relaying information and we were just repeating the same things. There's only so many times you can cover a news topic and continue, to speak about the underlying mechanisms behind it. But I'd certainly be up for it if there was enough support. I'd like the idea of doing, instead of the ARP, another Sunday sessions format every now and then. Just jumping online. That was an amazing thing that we created with the Sunday sessions, where we could just get people on board, then we could just bounce off of each other, all of these impromptu chats, giving people a platform that might feel alone to come in and to speak about these things. I'd be more down for more impromptu chats about more of the deeper issues that we have, as opposed to just looking at the news and explaining the agenda. I'd like to go deeper and look at history, spirituality, talk to people, like we had a police officer on, talk to people about that, just have impromptu chats going forward, because I think that would be the most beneficial thing for us to do, because there's only so many times that you can tell people, here's what's happening, here's our spin of it, think for yourselves. I think it would be more beneficial to get more people involved again, and to bounce ideas off of each other. So I'd be up for any, you know what I mean? It doesn't really bother me. As I said, I'm just focusing on myself and trying to affect change in my own life. And right now on this platform, anyone that's listening to me, they might go and do the same thing I'm doing. I've just effective change on the outside. So, it's up. I'm really easy for anything. As I said, the ARP's always been an amazing experience for me, and so was Sunday sessions. So I'd be happy to continue that forward if we did have enough support, but I think we'd have to do it right, John.
Well, it sounds to me like you're still interested in doing a little bit as far as the live podcasting, independent media side of things is concerned. And it will come down a lot, I think, to how much support there is for the show. We were lucky to get a lot of support from the listeners, a lot of emails and messages that were sent through supporting what we're doing and saying that they found huge benefit. And I've spoken to a lot of people who tell me they used to love downloading the show as an MP3, listening to it on the way to work or what have you, and there's no doubt that for a lot of people the show was beneficial, and certainly for us as well. The question is, what's the best use of our time going forward? And I think that's largely going to be dictated by what the listeners have to say in terms of, do they support the show? How much does it How much do they think the show as it is worth continuing with? How much would they like to see changed, etc.? So I hope that they will send their feedback through in the comments underneath this on YouTube or at AusRoundtable.com. Lindsay, I'll go to you there. We've had 6 months to take time away from the show. We did a whole year straight, 50 consecutive episodes plus the 3 G20 specials. And I think by the end we were all exhausted to one degree or another. We've had time now to refresh a little bit and to reflect on the show. What are your thoughts going forward about where you'd like to see yourself and independent media and the ARP in particular?
I'm quite happy to do whatever. I'm really quite flexible. I'm not trying to be vague here. I'm really quite flexible. I don't know what my life's going to hold in the near future. You know, I might be completely uprooted and have to get out and go out in the country, or anything could happen to me over the next year or two. So I really don't know. But at the moment, I'm starting to learn to do videos. So I'm interested in that. I'm involved with Wendy and Ethan. We're going to do stuff on Port Arthur. I'd be quite happy to do either the Sunday or the Sunday sessions or this podcast. You know, I don't mind. The way it was before, I was spending most of Friday night until 1 or 2 in the morning getting the preparation ready, and I don't mind doing that, as long as I know what, give them plenty of time to do whatever we've got to do. If we're just going to do the Sunday sessions where we just sit around and have a natter, I'm quite happy to do that. It's pretty freewheeling. But when the time comes and I've got to pull out, well then I'll have to pull out. Until I know where I'm going to stay or what I'm going to do. So I'm really quite open. And I don't know what's going to happen to me. So we've just got to wait and see.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It sounds like all three of us are still interested in doing regular shows, and I enjoy just sitting and chatting with the two of you, even if this wasn't being broadcast right now, just sitting around having a chat. Obviously, if it was just us and there was no audience, we'd be chatting a little bit less formally or structured, but it's the same idea, just chatting with two other guys who, we all have slightly different views, obviously, when it comes to things like history or working on ourselves or whatever. We've all got slightly different views on what's important, but what the three of us have in common is we're happy to talk about things, we're happy to scrutinize each other's beliefs and claims and evidence, and that's a very rare thing in society, at least in Australia today. This idea of sitting around and not getting angry or not getting emotional, just sitting around and having a chat about what we think is important. And I think the people who listen to our show, they fit into that group as well, of people who are like, well, I don't want to listen to the same nonsense on the 6 p.m. news. There's something different out there. I want to expose myself to that line of thinking and those ideas. So I think we're all in agreement. We've got some time going forward that we can put effort into something like this, whether it's the ARP or Sunday sessions. I really would appreciate any feedback from the listeners in the comment section underneath this. What do you think about the show? What did you like? What did you not like? What are some of your ideas going forward? For me personally, when it comes to Sunday sessions, that show was terrific for what it was. I think we got through about 16 episodes of that. Obviously, it was through that show that I met Matrix Decode, and then we started the Skeptic Roundtable, which took off and became its own thing and helped, I guess, structure my own direction with my channel, sort of for the last 9 or 12 months or what have you. So I got plenty of Sunday sessions. The only issue for me is that right now I feel as though on most of the topics that I think are important, I'm a lot further along the line than anybody who's likely to come onto the show. And even though they might be further than your average person watching TV, if they're still 3 or 4 steps behind me, I can find it very frustrating to talk to these people. That's just the reality. I think I've grown to the point now, when it comes to these topics, I've grown to the point now where, with rare exception, I'm going to find myself feeling the same way about anyone who joins us on Sunday sessions as I'd feel talking to the average person on a bus who watches the news. I think there's so many layers of programming that we have to deprogram ourselves from, that if you get even a couple of layers ahead of the person behind you, it doesn't matter if they're 10 steps ahead of the average person. If there's still a couple of layers of programming behind you, it can be very frustrating to talk to them. And I want your opinion on this, Ethan. Do you think it's possible? It could almost be, how do I put this? We might almost be doing ourselves a disservice to try and help these people play catch up, because we learned the hard way with Sunday sessions. Some people, they are where they are and they are never going further.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's obviously one of the things that I know yourself and I used to get frustrated with, and I'm sure now that it would be even worse in terms of that. The question is always, though, we continued the ARP not necessarily because we wanted to continue analysing the news towards the end. Towards the end, I hated looking up what was happening in the news just to talk about it, but we did it because we provided that platform for people to come to. We always encouraged people to make their own shows, to continue with it, but not too many people did. It was more that people just wanted to have, an outlet where other people did the talking for them, where they could get the information from. And it just begs the question at the end, John, it's just our own personal intent with it versus the actual intent of the platform? Should we, if we do have a platform where we can affect positive change on these people, should we, give up our own sort of intent with these things to allow that platform to prosper, do you think?
Well, that was the thing too, wasn't it? When we started the show, and you can hear this, if you go back and listen to the early episodes, we kept saying, hey, if we can do a podcast like this, you can do a podcast like this. It's actually really easy to use. Google Hangout, you'd be amazed how easy it is to do your own show, etc. And we were particularly trying to encourage our Australian listeners, hey, we have no independent media in this country, really. There aren't many people doing anything at all. Why don't you get into it? We need to see more people doing that. And we tried to build up the ARP to be a platform where other independent Australians could just come and share their thoughts. They might have a set topic, they might have a broad level of interest in different things, whatever the case may be. Hey, we'll build up the platform, we'll build the website, we'll get the weekly show. People will know they can tune in at 3 p.m. Brisbane time, or whatever the case may be, and know they're going to listen to fellow Aussies or the occasional international guest talking about these things. Why don't you get on board? And I can't speak for you, so I want your thoughts on this. One of the most frustrating things for me with the ARP, because it was good and bad. On the bad side of the ledger, one of the most frustrating things was the fact that we built this platform for other people to get on board with as well. We'd done a lot of the hard yards with the networking, the building the channel up and what have you. And the reality was that few, if any, people wanted to actually take part in the heavy lifting, the independent research, writing, podcasting, etc. And that kind of frustration, I think, even very patient, tolerant people will eventually start harming themselves spiritually when they're putting so much effort into something they want to share and no one wants to be a part of it. What say you?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Jono. And, as you mentioned, we started the ARP with the intent we wanted to build a community first and foremost. So that was both online and offline. So we wanted to originally, when we first had that first chat, bring people together who felt isolated with their thoughts, people who can't share it with the ones they love, the ones they work with, and let them know that we are here and they aren't alone, and hopefully through that encourage them to also get on board and really spiral into a proper roundtable where we were bouncing ideas off of each other and create that platform. We also originally started with the intent we wanted to reach the masses originally. So, we weren't only trying to appeal to draw people in, but we were trying to add a uniqueness to the product.
What the hell were we thinking, trying to reach the masses? That's what I mean. This has been a learning curve, hasn't it, eh?
Yeah, definitely. But I think even though, we didn't succeed with that, and even if we didn't succeed with people, getting on board with the thing, I still think that the show served a lot of purposes. I mean, we added a uniqueness to the product in general about how it was presented. We presented information in a professional manner, which obviously added credibility for us, for those who were looking in from the outside, if there were any that were looking in that discovered the show. And eventually, once we became YouTube-based, we ended up helping on the inside as well. So we were able to, laugh at the news, try and stay away from the doom and gloom, and other shows started to adopt this as well. A lot of shows, even on the minute levels, started to introduce some of the mechanisms that we had put with the platforms. We got to know our listeners and our listeners got to know us. We held meetup groups in Brisbane. We travelled to listeners' houses. They came to ours. And we've shown that you can make a go of this, even if it didn't end up appealing to the general public or going in the direction we originally intended with. So it goes back to the question of, even if we were frustrated and even if it wasn't serving the purpose that we wanted it to, it still did end up serving a purpose in the community, if that makes sense. So in terms of going forward, the real question is, should we sacrifice, knowing what we know now, should we sacrifice that frustration to continue a platform where we can affect some change, even if it is minute, if that makes sense?
Yeah, you're quite right. You make good points. We did some things that, I mean, looking back, they were really cool things. The idea of having listeners come and hang out with us, putting aside the fact how fun those meetups were, just looking at them for what they are. Hey, these are people who'd never met each other, apart from through this independent podcasting, website building, etc. Meeting real people, having real discussions. I mean, that's a really cool thing, and you're right, we did do that. Trying to get to know the listeners, the people who sent us emails and messages, reading out their comments constantly during the show, which we haven't done so much of today, but we did pride ourselves on during the season, trying to read out people's comments. We did a lot of really cool things. On the flip side of all of that, though, is that we did say to people, hey, we want you to be involved in this. We want to see you making your own videos. We want to get you on our show. We've got an audience of a few hundred people every week. You can introduce yourself to them through our show. We've done the heavy lifting. We've networked. Why don't you come and take advantage of it? And for every bit of joy that I got out of the good things that came with the show, I have to admit, by the end of that 50th episode and by the end of Sunday sessions, there was a part of me that was deeply, I don't know what the word is, whether it's hurt or alarmed or annoyed or frustrated, I don't know what the word is, but there was a part of me thinking, hey, a lot of these people are just taking the piss. They're just freeloaders. They're not really interested in doing anything for themselves. Our show is just a way for them to feel less alone for 2 hours, but the rest of the week they aren't doing shit, even though they know that a lot of us are doing quite a lot. And that, yeah, it's a very bitter pill to swallow. And Lindsay, I'm sure you can empathise with that. This idea of, well, come on then, you know, we've shown you that this can be done. It's not that hard. Just a bit of effort, and you can do a lot. You'll benefit from it so much. Why don't you get into it? And then when they refuse to do anything, at least that we can see, that I kind of been the only one who found that frustrating.
Yeah, I probably don't agree with you entirely, because I had a different, I suppose from a few more years than you, knocking my head against a brick wall, I tended to think of it more as it was some way of giving sustenance to all the ugly ducklings out there who think like us, but are alone in their community. They've got nobody to communicate with. And then suddenly you see other people. I just know from the Infrared Forum, you're in a room with 200 or 300 people who think of along the same sort of lines as you. You mightn't agree on everything, but you had that basic connection with them. And suddenly you realise, no, I'm not stupid, I'm not mad, and I'm not alone. There are others like this who think like me. It's just, you know, I'm stuck in an ocean of people who disagree with me. And that's what I was looking at with this. That's how I viewed it. So I didn't really have the sort of expectations you fellas had, I don't think. Like I was just overwhelmed that we had the number of people we had listening to us. So to me, that was the way I viewed it, which is probably slightly different to you. But you know, that's just the way it was.
Yeah, you make a good point. You have been through a lot of this more than we have, so you've seen the ups and the downs. I guess I came into this with this attitude of this should be collaborative. You know, Ethan, myself, and then you as well, Lindsay, will do what we can to try and build up. I mean, a few hundred people is amazing. It's still a small audience, but that's amazing, right? We'll do what we can to build that up, but we want to make it a collaborative thing where more people get involved, and hopefully, over time, we encourage more people to put their own stamp on things, do it your own way, cover your own topics, but between the group of us, we can start to build something up here. And by the end of the 50th week, it seemed to me as though this idea of being collaborative was very idealistic and naive. I was very naive to think that you could collaborate with most of these people, because most of these people, they're not here to collaborate. They're not here to help or to pitch in. They're not here to do anything themselves other than listen. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that. Like I said, I think we're all going to be judged at the end of this, and if they judge themselves well, then good on them. I'm not here to say that what I think is right and wrong is absolutely right and wrong for everyone. Everyone has to make up their own mind about why they think they're here, and I think that's also part of it as well. Obviously, I got into this through the hoax-busting community, the so-called truth movement, but I've long had an interest in questioning deeper things, what you might call existentialism. I used to believe that there was nothing, and then, bang, there was everything from a big bang. I lived on a giant spinning ball in deep, dark, empty space. There was no point to any of this. It was all an accident, etc. And I believed all of that crap because I was indoctrinated into believing that crap. Now I believe very different things. And so even if someone can agree with me that the Sydney siege was a hoax, or that Port Arthur Martin Bryant wasn't responsible, or that the recent shooting in Brussels is fake as buggery. Even if we agree on all of that, if deep down they still think this existence is all an accident and that it's not their role to do anything here to try and help anyone because, hey, what's the point of it all, then really on a fundamental level, myself and that person have nothing in common. On a far more important level, on a spiritual level, we've got nothing in common. And if most of the people who are following my work are like that, that can be very disheartening. And that's how I do feel sometimes, not just with the ARP, but even with my YouTube channel. 3,000 subscribers, the vast majority of those people I wouldn't want to sit down and have a conversation with. Because I don't like them as people, I don't respect them, I don't respect the way they live their lives. That's just my personal thing. Again, not saying that they are wrong or right, just saying I personally don't feel a connection with them. If they were like me, they'd be living in a different way. And so I'm at the point where it's like, well, I'm happy to put time in. I'm going to keep doing my own research. I'm working on some things at the moment that are going to blow people away, some of the things that I've discovered, and in due season I'll be releasing those. But I'll be releasing those because I feel like that's my contribution. I won't be releasing it to entertain these people. And I think a lot of them, Ethan, and I want your opinion on this, a lot of people, at the end of the day, they just want entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we need to understand taking forward. So we understand now that, sure, they're not going to get involved. So if there is going to be a platform, it's only going to be us, and there's going to be a large portion of people out there that are only going to listen. Now, that might, we encourage them that it's not too hard, there's nothing to be scared about, there's only so much we can do, but if they're not going to do it, after a year and a half, we need to accept that they're not going to do that. And it goes back to the question of going forward, because we did, even though we may not have got people involved, even though we didn't reach the masses, we did some great things as well. So, not just only on the physical level of reinventing what a show should be like and trying to get us to do it in a more structured manner, but we also, even if it was only, 1/100th of our actual audience that we actually properly affected, where they went out, they changed their life because of it, they awoken to things because of it, and now they question because of it, we still had that positive effect. And I guess the question going forward is, now that we know that we're solely the platform, if we found a way where we could restructure it, where we couldn't be as frustrated as we were previously, if we changed the approach, if we changed it to an approach where we're just discussing our own changes in our lives, our own beliefs in our lives, and you can take what you want from that, if we could restructure things so we're not as frustrated going forward, should we provide the platform nonetheless because we are having that positive effect, as opposed to not continuing because we end up frustrated with it, or we can't, we don't see other people getting involved, we see it going down a dead end. So, that question there of whether we should continue ultimately stems down to us and what we want to go forward with, Jono. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right. Once we've established that the collaborative side of this isn't going to happen the way that we'd hoped, then we need to reassess. And I always look at things from the perspective of, well, what's the goal? Once you know the goal, then you formulate a strategy. And once you know your strategy, then you work out a few tactics and you go from there. And I think my goal, this is just me speaking here, my goal with the show was heavily focused on trying to build a collaborative community. I still used to believe, when we started the show, I believed there was such thing as a truth community. You see what I mean? So the fact that I've even changed on that side of things changes everything. Now that my goal has changed from trying to build a collaborative community, or since I no longer think that that's a very plausible outcome in the short to intermediate future, then my overall strategy has to change as well. And the strategy of having a weekly or a regular podcast might not be the most efficient strategy for what my goals are now. And so I think a lot of what we're going to have to do over the next few days, weeks, months, etc., as the feedback comes in from the listeners, is work out exactly what we want to achieve with a show like the ARP or with the little platform that we've built, work out what the goal actually is, and then go from there. Because if the goal is to change the world and spread the truth and what have you, that might be a stillborn goal right from the get-go. It might be. These are things we have to think about. If the goal is to give people lots of entertainment, to give them 2 hours a week where they don't feel alone in questioning things, well, then maybe the podcast is the best strategy. The thing is, I don't want to do that. I was never here to entertain people. My goal was to try and make the show a little bit more entertaining, to make it more listenable. But that was only because I thought that the information and the question and the conversation was most important. I was never here to entertain people. If I'm going to entertain people, I want to get paid for it. Okay, that was never my goal with this, was to be people's entertainer. And by the end of that first season, I felt like for most of our listeners, that's all this was ultimately, was entertainment. And hey, I'm happy to entertain people, but it's going to cost you money. You see what I'm saying? The whole idea of doing this show was, we're not here to entertain you, we're here to try and stoke a conversation that should be taking place, and at the moment simply isn't. So we've come to the 2 hours, guys. We've got to wrap this one up. What I want to do is now give both yourself and Lindsay a chance to share your final thoughts. Take as long as you need to take, and then we'll wrap it up in a few moments' time. So Lindsay, we'll go to you there, mate. It's been a big show. Just like always, it's gone really quickly. We didn't manage to get to your conversation about the Magistrates Court and the legal system, so we'll make sure that next time we reconvene, if we reconvene, we'll cover that one right from the start. And if that's not an option, obviously you've got your YouTube channel where you will be releasing videos shortly. So why don't you give us a few moments of your final thoughts for the 6-month reunion show of the ARP. Take it away.
Okay, yeah. No, the same thing. I always say this. I enjoy it. It gives me some sort of fulfillment, so I'm quite happy with it. Can I just mention one thing about the entertainment? I suggest that you look at your enemy and you'll see that that's exactly what they do. They put entertainment there to get everybody in, and then they feed the message through the entertainment. And I think that's pretty much what we've been doing. So I don't despise the entertainment. I think it's the medicine, was it the sugar or whatever that helps the medicine go down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think people were just enjoying the sugar and they weren't taking any of the medicine.
No, you underestimate yourself. You can't put up with 2 hours like that every week and not get something out of it. It just changes your attitude. Just the fact that you've got other people who in public saying the sort of things that you believe will reinforce that. Believe me, that's just the way it is. It's very hard not to have that happen. Now, just because they don't go out and do what we were doing or do what we think they should be doing or whatever, to me, that's not important. It was getting through. Believe me, it was getting through. So I'm quite happy with it, and I'm quite happy to go on and do whatever you fellas are happy doing. I'm almost like a free agent now. I can pretty much fit in with anything, and I'm quite happy to do it because it fulfills my expectations. I'm trying to continue on a lifetime of doing this sort of thing. So I'm quite happy to fit in with you. I feel sort of very privileged, because I can see, maybe the people listening don't see it as much as me, but I can see the talent that you fellas have got in your own directions, and you know, I think it's great. I'm just so pleased that I'm able to mix in the same company. If that's, I'm not trying to piss in your pocket, but it's true. That's true, right? So whatever you do, I'll be quite happy to fit in with.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Lindsay. And that was one of the things you did say a lot, not trying to piss in our pocket. Don't worry, Lindsay, I know you're not trying to piss in
So I should restrain myself from swearing, shouldn't I?
No, you're right, mate. Look, I get what you're saying, and you're right. There's a cathartic aspect to this. Like, we got so much out of doing the show, and I've said that so many times. There's a cathartism, if that's the word, that comes with getting to express your thoughts. The thing is, I've got my own YouTube channel now. Ethan has one that he can use should he choose to. Soon, Lindsay, if all goes to plan, you'll start uploading videos on a regular basis. And what you'll find is that sometimes just making videos can give you that catharsis that you're looking for. The podcast isn't necessarily the best format for getting those things off your chest or sharing what you want to share. It might be, but it might not be. And I suppose that's where I come at this from a different angle to what you do, Lindsay. I've got my own channel where I can talk about whatever I want. It's completely different to the ARP, where we were more structured and focused on set things. And so I don't really need the catharsis from doing the show anymore. That's why it did become a chore, because the time that I put into the podcast, I could have been putting into my videos, showing people the latest research I've done into this historical hoax or that historical hoax, etc. So there's an aspect of prioritizing time, and as you start uploading videos, you might find that you find that even more enjoyable than you find the podcast. And I do hope the listeners do go to your channel, subscribe, and check out your videos. I can tell the listeners that Lindsay's been working on these videos for quite a while, but because he's still new to video uploading, content creation of that kind, he's being a little bit of a perfectionist, and he doesn't want to make any of these videos public until he thinks he's got them perfectly right. What you're going to find, Lindsay, is that the people want to see your videos, even if they're not quite perfect. Nobody's videos are, and what's more important is the content you're going to be releasing. So hopefully, Lindsay, you use this as a little kick up the backside to start making those videos public, getting them out there, that people can go and check those out in the interim between this episode and whatever comes forth. So thank you so much for your time, Lindsay. Really appreciate it, and make sure you stick around for the after show in just a moment. Ethan Nash of TOTT News, your chance now to get your final thoughts out there on the 6-month reunion of the ARP. Anything you want to leave listeners with, take it away.
I just want to thank all of the listeners for tuning in. After 6 months, we had people inboxing us and sending us emails that said that they were very excited that we were coming back, and I'm glad that we could have had that, positive effect on even if it was only a small world around us, And I always say that ARP was the best experience of my life. It's given me so much from that, and whether it's individually or collectively with you blokes going forward, I think that I'm always just going to continue to reflect, my own self and my own changes, and hopefully put that out there for everyone to take from. So send us emails, send us inboxes, jump on social media, do whatever you have to do. If you want us to continue, let us know. Whatever format, let us know. Just give it to us straight, the good and the bad, the pretty and the ugly, and we'll formulate what's best to go forward from there. But all of our intentions will always be to continue doing this stuff. So we've got our individual work, tottnews.com for me. Lindsay the Silver Fox, I've checked out one of his videos so far he sent to me. It's very good, so he's got some content coming. Lindsay and I are going to do the Port Arthur thing. John's always doing his work on his YouTube channel. As he mentioned, he's got some things coming. So even though the ARP might not continue or Sunday sessions might not continue, we're always going to be here, and we're always going to be doing this. And as I said, my intention is just to reflect positivity from myself and everything that I've learnt, and try to encourage people to think for themselves. And I think that this show really exemplified that, and I'm really proud of this show. And I just want to thank everyone that really did take the time to tune in, the people that we really did affect. I just want to thank them, and I also want to thank the other side of the spectrum as well, the people who just showed up for a laugh, for a troll. All of you has helped make this experience great, and it definitely taught us a lot. So thank you to everyone.
Excellent. All right then. So a few final thoughts from me. Firstly, we've still got the Podbean account. So if you go to our website, ausroundtable.com, that's AUSroundtable.com. All of our episodes are still there. All of the links are still there. In fact, the 2 articles that I spoke about today, we'll be posting links to those as well. One of the things we really tried to focus on with our show was saying, hey, it is our opinions, but not just that. Here's why we have the opinions we have, or here's what we're talking about. Go and check it out for yourself. And I know from the statistics, because when you have your own cPanel hosting account, you can see the statistics. I know that less than 10% of our listeners would actually go and double check the links. However, even though it was less than 10%, there were still people out there. There were still dozens of people out there who were double checking our links, actually doing their own research. And they're really the people who, for me, still make all of this worthwhile. The people who are using this as a starting point, a way to give them an idea of what to go and look into next. And that's still there. So ausroundtable.com is still there. I've paid for another year of hosting on Podbean, which is where the MP3s are stored as an MP3 file. So you can go right through the archives. They'll be there for at least another 12 months. And at the end of the ARP Season 1, one of our listeners, not sure if he wants us to say his name, but he actually sent through a little bit of money that has basically contributed to... I would have paid for that Podbean to keep going anyway, but to know that there was someone out there who was willing to contribute in that way, more than the money, just the fact that they would send that through to us, having never met us personally, that kind of thing is it's extraordinary. So to that particular gentleman, if you're still out there, still listening, I've already thanked you before, but I want to thank you again so much for that gesture. And so that Podbean will still be there. That's AustralianRoundtable.podbean.com, but all the links are on our main website, ausroundtable.com, and all of the archives are still there. So if you're someone who only found this show relatively late in its run, sure, there are some things we talked about in the first few episodes that I might not find as interesting now, or I might have even had views back then that are a little bit different to what they are now. The idea wasn't for you to hear our views and copy them. The idea was for you to hear our conversations and the questions we were asking and go from there. So by all means, please go back through the archives. People are still doing that. If I check out the statistics through Podbean, I can see that people are going back through the archives, they're still listening, and that was one of our other main objectives, was to put out something that, even if we did change our opinions later on, We were giving reasons as to why we believed what we believed. We were putting the links there. We were putting something that would still be listenable in 12 months' time or 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and it's all still there, and I'm still very proud of it. I might come across a little bit cynical or jaded at times, and I know that can be frustrating for the listeners, but this is me sharing with you my thoughts on everything 6 months on from a show that did change my life in so many ways. And Ethan and I might not have talked about it so much today, but we've gone on and done different things with our lives outside of all of this to what we were doing last year. And he can tell you, and I can tell you, that just through doing a podcast, we've improved in our communication and our ways of delivering ideas and what have you that is useful in the so-called real world surrounded with all of the slaves. So I've benefited so much from this show, so never take anything I say the wrong way. All of the positive feedback that we got, and some of the critical feedback that we got, not that there was much of it, but sometimes even that was useful. Honestly, I can't thank anyone who's done anything enough for this, because I've gotten so much from it, and I think that's really where my frustration comes from. I'm telling you people, I got so much from doing this show. I met so many cool people. I can't describe to people just how much I've got from doing the show, and I'm trying to tell you it's really easy. So when I'm sitting here saying to people, look, here's something that I did, you can see what I did. I'm not making this up. You can go and check it out. It's all there. You can see what I did. I'm telling you, look what I got from it, and then you're still sitting there saying, nah, don't want to do anything like that. That's, you know, I can't describe the frustration that comes from that, where you can show people how you've improved as a person, how much you've gotten from something. A really good solution to a lot of problems that we all have in terms of feeling isolated or feeling ostracized because we question certain things or don't believe certain things. Hey, here's a way for you to build what amounts to a community. Let's do it together. And then you say you don't want to do anything really to get involved in that. That's a real slap in the face, and that's where the frustration comes from. But you never know what the future holds. It's 2016. Anything could happen from here. So leave your feedback and your comments either on AusRoundtable.com or underneath this video on YouTube. Let us know what you think about the show, what you'd like to see going forward. We'll reconvene at a later date, privately or publicly. And as Ethan said, you haven't heard the last of us. We've all got our channels. I'll provide a link to Lindsay's channel underneath this, obviously to Top News as well, and to my channel, John the Bond. We're still here. As far as the ARP's future is concerned, where's it all going, we still don't know. But as soon as we do, we'll let you know. But for the time being, on the 17th of April, 2016, the 6-month reunion show of the ARP. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Share it with friends and family. Give us back your feedback. And until next time, take care of yourselves.